Caitlin Coons first met Jonathan Jones when she was only 15 years old, and he was 30. Their relationship would soon spiral into something deeply troubling. Caitlin, who had spent much of her young life in Ohio's foster care system, she was living in a group home in Canton when she first encountered Jonathan. She had faced numerous challenges throughout her childhood, bouncing between foster families and care facilities. She desperately seeking stability and someone who would truly care for her. Like many children in state custody, she had experienced multiple placements, each bringing its own disappointments. These constant moves had left her feeling abandoned, creating deep emotional wounds that made her vulnerable. Caitlin couldn't help but hope that each new placement would provide the loving, stable environment she craved, but these hopes were repeatedly dashed. Jonathan, 15 years her senior, seemed to offer the attention and affection that Caitlin had been searching for. However, their relationship was far from appropriate or legal. At 30, Jonathan was a grown man who should have known better than to pursue a romantic relationship with a 15-year-old girl. Caitlin couldn't help but be drawn to someone who appeared to understand her struggles and offered her the emotional connection she had been craving. What she didn't realize was that she was becoming involved with a predatory man who would ultimately lead her down a dark and destructive path. As their relationship developed, it became increasingly clear that Jonathan was taking advantage of Caitlin's vulnerable state. Caitlin's unstable past made her emotionally vulnerable, and she became dependent on Jonathan, who took advantage of her youth and desire for love. Jonathan manipulated Caitlin by exploiting her weaknesses. He told her she was mature, different, and their relationship was special. These tactics are commonly used by predators to make victims feel responsible for their own exploitation. Jonathan had complete control, and Caitlin became isolated, making it difficult for her to see that she was being manipulated and believed their relationship was genuine. Even though there were clear warning signs, her longing for love and inexperience with healthy relationships blinded her to the fact that she was being victimized. She saw Jonathan as her rescuer, the one finally giving her the love she desired. In March 2023, Jonathan's predatory behavior was exposed when he was convicted of enticing a child to view adult material and child endangerment. The court found that he had engaged in intimate with 15-year-old Caitlin and planned to sell photographs of their encounters. This revealed the extent of his exploitation and abuse. After the conviction, the court had ordered him to stay away from Caitlin and put a GPS tracker on him to monitor his location. Despite these efforts, tragedy was unavoidable. Nicole Jones, Jonathan's 53-year-old mother, lived in Sylvania Township. She was very worried about her son's relationship with the teenage girl, Caitlin. She was concerned about Jonathan's legal problems and the negative impact the relationship was having on both of them. As a caring mother, Nicole had seen her adult son making increasingly bad choices. She had tried to support him, but his relationship with a teenager and the resulting legal issues were almost too much to bear. Nicole felt stuck between her love for her son and her duty to protect a vulnerable young girl. The seriousness of the situation and the potential consequences of Jonathan's actions made her even more anxious. As a mother, Nicole had always tried to see the best in Jonathan, even when his behavior was clearly problematic. However, his relationship with Caitlin represented a new level of concern. The teenage girl was undeniably vulnerable and traumatized, and Jonathan appeared to be exploiting someone who needed protection. Nicole felt a sense of responsibility, not only for her son's actions, but also for Caitlin's welfare. She had repeatedly talked to Jonathan about the inappropriate nature of his relationship, pointing out the age difference and legal ramifications. She remained steadfast in her belief that Jonathan needed to end the relationship and seek help for the issues driving him to pursue someone so young and vulnerable. In April 2023, despite the court order, Caitlin made the fateful decision to leave her foster care placement in Canton. The 17-year-old girl, still deeply attached to Jonathan, couldn't resist what she believed was love. She met Jonathan at a local restaurant, and together they returned to his mother's home in Sylvania Township. Caitlin hoped this reunion would somehow make everything better, that they could find a way to be together without further problems. Nicole didn't know that Caitlin was secretly living in her house. Caitlin had climbed in through Jonathan's bedroom window and was hiding from Nicole. This created a stressful and difficult situation, as Caitlin was living a secret life in Nicole's home, where Nicole was trying to live normally. This situation put a strain on everyone. Nicole was unaware of everything happening in her own home, and it was becoming harder to keep Caitlin hidden. Caitlin had to stay quiet during the day and avoid being seen. Caitlin grew frustrated with the secrecy and the constant fear of being discovered, and she realized that this situation couldn't last. As days passed, the strain of keeping Caitlin's presence hidden became increasingly difficult. Jonathan knew it was only a matter of time before his mother discovered Caitlin's presence, and he knew his mother would not approve. It was evident that Nicole was genuinely concerned about both Jonathan's welfare and Caitlin's. However, her attempts to intervene and protect them would ultimately put her in grave danger. The tension in the household reached a breaking point when Caitlin became convinced that Nicole was the primary obstacle to her being with Jonathan. Warped by trauma and manipulation, Caitlin was unable to see that Nicole's concerns were legitimate and protective. Instead, she viewed Nicole as an enemy, deliberately trying to destroy her relationship. This perception fueled increasingly dark thoughts about how to eliminate the perceived obstacle. On April 19, 2023, Caitlin's frustration and desperation reached a dangerous crescendo. She made a decision that would forever change multiple lives. Caitlin gave Jonathan an ultimatum that was both shocking and terrifying in its cold calculation. Jonathan had 5 hours to kill his own mother, Nicole, or she would end their relationship forever. This demand was so extreme and disturbing that it revealed the depth of Caitlin's psychological disturbance and the toxic nature of their relationship. Jonathan, faced with this impossible choice, found himself paralyzed by fear and indecision. Although he had made numerous poor choices in his life, including his predatory relationship with Caitlin, the prospect of murdering his own mother was apparently beyond even his moral boundaries. As the 5-hour deadline approached, Jonathan could not bring himself to harm the woman who had given him life and had tried to help him throughout his struggles. Caitlin wanted Jonathan to kill Nicole. When he refused, she gave him an extra hour, hoping he would change his mind. But Jonathan still didn't act. So, Caitlin decided she would kill Nicole herself. She believed that for her relationship with Jonathan to work, Nicole had to die. Despite feeling troubled and pressured, she resolved to commit the murder since Jonathan wouldn't. On the evening of April 19, 2023, Nicole Jones stood in her kitchen, facing her refrigerator. Unbeknownst to her, Caitlin was outside and had found a large rock. Caitlin brought the rock inside, intending to use it as a weapon. Nicole continued her usual evening routine, completely unaware that Caitlin was about to end her life in a shocking and violent way. Her kitchen, normally a place of comfort, was about to become the scene of a brutal crime. As Nicole stood, with her back turned, focused on whatever she was retrieving from the refrigerator, Caitlin approached from behind with the rock in her hands. In a moment of pure evil and violence, Caitlin began bludgeoning Nicole over the head with the rock, striking her multiple times with brutal force. The attack was swift and merciless, giving Nicole no opportunity to defend herself or even understand what was happening. As if the bludgeoning wasn't enough to ensure Nicole's death, Caitlin then strangled her, making certain that she would never again interfere in her relationship with Jonathan. Jonathan was in the living room when his girlfriend, Caitlin, murdered his mother in the kitchen. Instead of calling for help or trying to save her, Jonathan chose to help Caitlin hide the crime. This decision made him an accomplice in a shocking murder case. They worked together to dispose of Nicole's body. They drove to 2 local stores, purchasing a tarp and garbage bags to wrap Nicole's lifeless body. They returned to the house and wrapped Nicole's body in the materials they had purchased. After wrapping the body, Jonathan and Caitlin loaded Nicole into the trunk. In perhaps one of the most disturbing details of this case, prosecutors later revealed that Jonathan and Caitlin actually went out to dinner while Nicole's body remained in the trunk. Following their dinner, they drove to a nearby apartment complex and disposed of Nicole's body in a dumpster, treating her as mere garbage to be discarded. The dumpster was collected the following day as part of the normal garbage pickup, and Nicole's body was taken to a landfill. Even though law enforcement searched thoroughly, Nicole's body was never found. This prevents her family from having the closure they would get from a proper burial. With Nicole's body disposed of, Jonathan and Caitlin decided to flee the area to avoid prosecution. They took Nicole's 2021 Buick Encore and began driving west, eventually crossing the border into Mexico. Along with the car, they also took Nicole's social security card, identification, credit cards, and health insurance card, essentially stealing her identity along with her life. However, their escape was short-lived. Caitlin, perhaps overwhelmed by the magnitude of her actions, made a critical error that would lead to their capture. While on the run, she contacted one of her caregivers and confessed to the murder, admitting that she had killed Jonathan's mother. This confession prompted the caregiver to immediately contact law enforcement, who began working with U.S. Marshals to track down Jonathan and Caitlin. The search for Jonathan and Caitlin became an international manhunt, with law enforcement agencies on both sides of the border cooperating to locate them. Fortunately for investigators, Jonathan was still wearing the Jeep's tracking device, mandated as part of his earlier conviction. This device allowed authorities to track their movements and ultimately locate them in the municipality of Ahumada, in the state of Chihuahua, Mexico, on May 8, 2023, approximately 3 weeks after Nicole's murder. U.S. Marshals and Mexican authorities successfully apprehended both Jonathan and Caitlin. They were found in possession of Nicole's vehicle and personal documents, providing further evidence of their guilt. Jonathan and Caitlin was extradited back to the United States to face charges for their roles in Nicole's brutal murder. Before, back in Ohio, law enforcement had been conducting a thorough investigation into Nicole's disappearance and presumed death. The investigation had begun on May 5, 2023, when Canton Police contacted Sylvania Township Police requesting a welfare check on Nicole Jones. When officers arrived at her condominium, they were unable to locate her despite conducting a thorough search of the premises. As the investigation unfolded, the true horror of what had transpired became clear. Detective Jake Albright of the Sylvania Township Police Department interviewed Caitlin extensively after her arrest, and she provided detailed confessions about how she had murdered Nicole. The case against both Caitlin and Jonathan was overwhelming. In addition to Caitlin's confessions, investigators had Jeep's tracking data from Jonathan's ankle monitor that corroborated the timeline of events and their movements after the murder. Surveillance footage from the stores where they purchased supplies further supported the prosecution's case against them. Initially, prosecutors charged Caitlin with aggravated murder, abuse of a corpse, felonious assault, and tampering with evidence. Given the serious nature of the charges and the calculated manner in which the crime was committed, the court decided to charge Caitlin as an adult. Despite her being only 17 at the time of the murder, Jonathan faced even more charges, including 2 counts of aggravated murder, felonious assault, aggravated burglary, aggravated robbery, tampering with evidence, and abuse of a corpse. However, as the case moved through the legal system, both defendants ultimately decided to accept plea agreements rather than face trial. On June 4, 2024, both Caitlin Coons, now 18, and Jonathan Jones, 33, appeared in Lucas County Common Police Court before judge. They each pleaded no contest to charges of aggravated murder and abuse of a corpse. As part of the plea agreement, prosecutors agreed to dismiss the remaining charges against both defendants. The judge sentenced each of them to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 25 years. While this sentence ensures that both will spend decades behind bars, it also means that they could potentially be released while still relatively young, a thought that brings little comfort to Nicole's grieving family. During the sentencing hearing, the impact of Nicole's murder on her family became painfully clear. Nicole's brother, Robert Jones, who is the administrator of her estate, spoke about the devastating effect her loss has had on their family. Lucas County Prosecutor Julia Bates addressed the case following the sentencing, acknowledging the horror of what had transpired and expressing hope that the resolution would bring some measure of peace to Nicole's family. She said, "This was a horrific event." In her statement, they are relieved to reach a resolution in this case. They hope this brings some measure of peace to Nicole Jones's family. May her memory forever live in their hearts. As a result of this case, Robert Jones, representing Nicole's estate, has filed a civil lawsuit against Caitlin and Jonathan for wrongful death. The lawsuit seeks $25,000 in damages, in addition to punitive damages and other expenses. The suit acknowledges that no amount of money can truly make up for Nicole's death and the way it occurred. A tragic part of this case is that Nicole's body has never been found. Her family has been deprived of the fundamental right to give her a proper burial and have a place to remember and honor her. Not knowing where Nicole's remains are located intensifies their suffering. This case serves as a stark reminder of the devastating consequences that can result from predatory relationships and the exploitation of vulnerable individuals. Caitlin, who began as a victim of Jonathan's inappropriate pursuit when she was just 15, ultimately became a perpetrator of one of the most brutal murders imaginable. While this transformation does not excuse her actions, it highlights the complex dynamics that can develop when adults prey upon children who are already struggling with trauma and instability. The residents of Sylvania Township, especially those in Nicole's condominium complex, were deeply disturbed by the terrible crime. Many residents are elderly and had moved there because they thought it was a safe and peaceful place to live. The shocking murder of their neighbor by her son and his teenage girlfriend destroyed their feeling of safety and showed that violence can happen anywhere, even in quiet communities. As this case comes to a close with the sentencing of both perpetrators, Nicole Jones's family continues to struggle with their immense loss. It was evident to everyone that Nicole Jones was a caring mother who had tried to protect both her son and the teenage girl her son was exploiting. Her concern for their welfare ultimately cost her life as she became the victim of a crime so brutal and senseless that it continues to shock all who learn about it. Roberta Sargiassi grew up in the small town of Vasto, in the province of Chieti, Abruzzo, southeastern Italy. Her parents, along with most of her extended family, also lived there. She shared a particularly close bond with her mother. They confided in each other and were always in touch. From a young age, Roberta was known for her outgoing nature, kind heart, and cheerful personality. She excelled as a student and developed a deep passion for cooking, particularly showcasing her talent in baking pies and cakes. She was well liked by her peers and cherished spending time with her many friends. After completing public school, Roberta enrolled in Italy's School of Hospitality and Culinary Arts. At the age of 20, she began working at the most renowned bakery in her hometown, owned by the Lello family. Every family member participated in the bakery's operations, and Roberta became close friends with Fabio Di Lello, the younger son, who was her age and worked alongside her. Spending so much time together, their friendship quickly blossomed into a romantic relationship. Both families were very supportive of they. Roberta's parents took an immediate liking to Fabio, and Fabio's parents admired Roberta for her strong work ethic and sense of responsibility. By the age of 25, Roberta and Fabio had moved in together, sharing a rented apartment while saving money to buy their own home. Fabio, a passionate and dedicated soccer player since childhood, had achieved notable success. He served as the captain of the city's soccer team and performed impressively in amateur tournaments. In 2014, he made his debut in Serie D, the highest amateur soccer division under the Italian National League Federation. In 2015, Roberta and Fabio achieved a milestone in their lives. That autumn, they celebrated their wedding with a grand ceremony and moved into a spacious and cozy house of their own. They were overjoyed and excited about their future, making plans they were eager to fulfill, plans that would tragically never come to fruition. On the morning of Friday, July the 1st, 2016, Roberta, then 34, called her mother as she did every day. She suggested having dinner that evening at her parents' house, intending to gather everyone there to share exciting news. Keeping the announcement a surprise, she planned to reveal it at dinner and agreed with her mother to prepare the meal and set the table together. Around 2 p.m., Roberta left her house on her scooter, heading to her parents' home, just a few kilometers away, a trip that usually took about 10 minutes. Tragically, Roberta never arrived. While passing through one of the busiest intersections in town and carefully obeying traffic rules, a Fiat Punto sped through a red light from the opposite lane and collided violently with her scooter. The car then crashed into another vehicle. The force of the impact threw Roberta into a metal pole and onto the sidewalk. She sustained a severe, traumatic brain injury, lost a significant amount of blood, and was barely alive by the time emergency services arrived. Paramedics were astonished that Roberta was still alive, given the extent of her injuries. She was rushed to the nearest hospital and immediately taken into surgery. Despite the efforts of the top surgeons, who worked tirelessly for nearly an hour, her injuries were simply too severe. Roberta passed away without regaining consciousness. The drivers of the other two vehicles involved in the crash suffered only minor injuries and did not require hospitalization. The driver of the Fiat Punto was identified as 21-year-old local resident Italo De Lisa. He remained at the scene visibly shaken and did not attempt to flee. He waited for the police to arrive, cooperated fully, and explained what had happened. He admitted he had briefly taken his eyes off the road and failed to notice the traffic light turning red. By the time he realized, it was too late to avoid the collision. After hitting Roberta's scooter, he panicked, swerved into oncoming traffic, and struck another car. He willingly handed over his documents and underwent a toxicology screening at the hospital, which confirmed that he was not under the influence of alcohol or any banned substances. Witnesses and officers noted his profound remorse. Upon learning later that Roberta had not survived, he was overcome with distress and nearly collapsed. Fabio was the first to hear the devastating news. He rushed to the hospital just minutes after his wife, Roberta, had been brought in. In the hallway, he broke down, crying and praying, desperately pleading for updates from every doctor and nurse who entered or left the operating room. About 30 minutes later, the surgeon came out and, after a pause, informed Fabio that they had done everything possible, but Roberta could not be saved. Fabio's reaction was heartbreaking. Stunned and in denial, he repeatedly begged to see Roberta, clinging to the hope that there had been some mistake. But the truth was inescapable. She had passed away. As the reality sunk in, Fabio was overtaken by grief and anger. Overwhelmed, he reportedly wanted to confront the person responsible immediately. Hospital staff had to physically restrain him and escort him to a private room where he was given a sedative to calm down. At the same time, Italo, the driver responsible for the crash, was deeply shaken, repeatedly saying he didn't deserve forgiveness. Meanwhile, Roberta's parents were growing anxious. Their daughter was overdue and not answering her phone. They began calling Fabio, who initially didn't pick up. When he finally answered, he tearfully broke the tragic news. Within 15 minutes, both Roberta's and Fabio's families gathered at the hospital, struggling to process the devastating loss. Their vibrant and joyful lives, filled with dreams and plans, had been shattered in an instant. Instead of celebrating Roberta and Fabio's upcoming anniversary, they were now faced with the unimaginable task of saying goodbye to her. Roberta was laid to rest on July 3, 2016, just 2 months before what would have been her and Fabio's first wedding anniversary. The farewell took place in the same church where they had recently pledged their love and commitment. The priest who officiated their wedding also led this deeply somber memorial service. The small church overflowed with mourners. So many people came that not everyone could fit inside. Roberta was beloved and well respected in her community, and friends, neighbors, and colleagues gathered to honor her memory and support her grieving family. The tragedy left the entire town in shock. Few could believe she was truly gone. The man responsible for the fatal crash, Italo, did not flee the scene. He cooperated fully and underwent medical testing at the hospital. He was completely sober and had no history of mental illness or emotional instability. The crash happened at a busy intersection, equipped with multiple traffic cameras. The police reviewed footage from 4 different angles, clearly capturing the accident. Investigators also retrieved surveillance videos showing the routes both drivers took prior to the crash. The footage revealed that both vehicles had adhered to traffic laws and speed limits. However, at the crucial moment, Italo failed to stop at a red light. He drove through the intersection, colliding with the scooter Roberta was riding. After hitting Roberta, Italo's Fiat Punto struck another car coming from the opposite direction. Fortunately, the driver of the second car was not seriously injured, and his vehicle damage was covered by insurance, so he did not pursue legal action. Tragically, Roberta's injuries were far too severe to be treated. Italo expressed his deep regret, claiming he had been distracted for just a moment. Despite his regret, nothing could ease the pain of Roberta's loved ones, particularly Fabio, who struggled to suppress his anger toward the man responsible. The 21-year-old driver, Italo, was arrested and formally charged with involuntary harm, causing fatal injuries. He was placed in pre-trial detention while awaiting the court proceedings. He did not contest the charges, declaring that he was ready to accept any punishment imposed. Fabio closely followed every development in the investigation. He meticulously reviewed all available evidence and met with detectives daily in his search for answers and any additional leads. Fabio strongly rejected the official findings, convinced that Italo or his family had influenced the authorities to minimize his responsibility for the accident. Fabio believed the crash was caused by substance use and was determined to keep the case in the public eye. Fabio organized protests and marches, demanding full accountability from Italo for the fatal accident. Many people, especially those who had known Roberta, supported him. Fabio also launched an aggressive online campaign against Italo and his family, accusing him of intentional misconduct, banned substance use, and claiming that his relatives had bribed officials to tamper with the toxicology report. His social media posts, filled with accusations and cries for justice, appeared daily. On July 15, 2016, Fabio organized a memorial march for Roberta, attended by hundreds, carrying her photos and signs demanding justice. Fabio's rhetoric grew more intense, threatening further demonstrations and even suggesting, during emotional outbursts, that he might take matters into his own hands if the authorities failed to act. His increasingly confrontational tone stirred public outrage but also alarmed Italo's family, who began fearing for their safety. Fabio's hostility toward Italo was evident as he worked to sway public opinion against him. Fabio's actions hinted at a willingness to disregard the law to seek retribution. In response, Italo's family filed for a court order to protect themselves, citing Fabio's harassment and threats. The case remained under investigation with incomplete evidence, but the situation was becoming dangerously volatile and required urgent legal action. On July 20th, Fabio was issued a court order barring him from accusing Italo of a crime, inciting hatred, posting harmful content online, or encouraging hostility toward Italo or his family. Fabio complied, but abruptly withdrew from public advocacy, leaving others unsettled by his silence. Every day, Fabio visited the grave of his late wife, Roberta, bringing fresh flowers. He spent hours there, sometimes standing silently, other times kneeling, crying, or praying. His family, hoping he just needed time to grieve, chose not to intervene, but his behavior only escalated. Fabio erected a memorial at the accident site and turned Roberta's gravesite into a detailed tribute with photos from their happiest moments. He began spending entire days at the cemetery. He quit soccer, his lifelong passion, and stopped going to work. Nothing seemed to matter to Fabio anymore. His life revolved around the flower-covered grave. He ate little, lost significant weight, and looked pale and exhausted. Within weeks, he appeared drastically older, withdrawn from others. Fabio grew disconnected from reality. One morning, cemetery staff found Fabio at Roberta's grave before opening hours. He had climbed the fence overnight, saying he needed to be close to her. He told relatives he couldn't bear staying in their home, filled with memories of Roberta. Only at her gravesite did he feel any peace. Fabio spoke to her as though she was still alive, refusing to refer to her in the past tense. Fabio's older brother suggested a brief trip to Rome to help him clear his head, but Fabio refused, insisting he couldn't leave Roberta alone in the cemetery. This was a clear sign that Fabio needed more than the support of loved ones. He required urgent professional psychiatric care. Fabio's brother and other family members dismissed his concerning words and erratic behavior, believing time would heal him. Unfortunately, they were tragically wrong. Meanwhile, the parents of Italo, who was still in custody, hired a top attorney to defend their son. The lawyer was confident from the start, highlighting that Italo had no prior criminal record, rarely broke traffic laws, and tested sober at the time of the incident. While the attorney admitted that running a red light was a mistake, he argued there was no evidence to support serious charges, such as premeditated intent. He also pointed out that Italo had followed the speed limit throughout his drive, and it remained unclear what had distracted him. To support their case, the defense presented character testimonials from Italo's school and workplace, as well as evidence of his volunteer work in environmental causes and his enrollment in firefighter training courses. Italo had planned to dedicate himself to public service after finishing his certification exams. During the trial, the defense submitted surveillance footage showing Roberta on her scooter without a helmet, which violated safety regulations. The attorney argued that wearing a helmet could have lessened the severity of her injuries and perhaps even saved her life. Considering this footage, Italo's clean record, and Roberta's safety oversight, the court modified his pre-trial conditions. He was released under judicial supervision shortly before Christmas 2016, with the final decision scheduled for February 2017. Other than a few restrictions, Italo resumed a normal life. When Fabio learned that the man responsible for the accident had been released, he was consumed by rage. In court, he shouted and tried to physically confront Italo and Italo's attorney. Family members struggled to hold him back, and the judge ordered him to be removed from the courtroom. After Italo's release, Fabio became sleepless, angry, and withdrawn. He spent countless hours by Roberta's grave, talking to her as if she was still alive. Despite Fabio's worsening mental state, his family did not seek professional help. They thought he just needed more time to heal. When they suggested seeing a mental health specialist, Fabio reacted with hostility. He began accusing the justice system of being corrupt and incapable of delivering a fair outcome. When Italo was allowed to await trial out of custody, Fabio completely lost faith in the law. He decided to take matters into his own hands, but didn't reveal his plans to anyone. His behavior shifted noticeably. He became increasingly secretive and withdrawn. Fabio had an interest in firearms dating back to his youth. He regularly visited shooting ranges and, in 2006, obtained a firearm license, purchasing a 9mm pistol that he kept secured in a safe at home. Now consumed by thoughts of vengeance, he started handling the weapon often, convinced that it was his only means of achieving justice. As New Year's approached, Fabio's social media activity took a dark turn. He began posting about justice, revenge, and reflections on life's meaning, lamenting how his own life had lost purpose. These posts were deeply troubling, but sadly, they went unnoticed. In January, Fabio began secretly following Italo to avoid drawing attention. Fabio observed his daily routines, the places he visited, and the people he interacted with. Using this information, Fabio devised a plan. On February 1, 2017, he took a loaded pistol and went to a bar on Via Perth, a location Italo frequented and close to his home. Fabio entered the bar to confirm Italo was there. After spotting him, he left quietly and found a discreet location nearby to wait. Around 9:30 p.m., Italo exited the bar, chatted briefly with friends, and was about to head home. At that moment, Fabio confronted him. Italo sensed something was wrong, and both men froze briefly. Then Fabio pulled out his pistol and fired 3 shots at close range. The first shot struck Italo in the abdomen, the second near his heart, and the third, a headshot, ensured there was no chance of survival. Fabio, an experienced marksman, executed the act with precision, leaving no room for error. Afterward, Fabio walked calmly to his car. Witnesses, shocked by what they had seen, were too afraid to intervene, knowing he likely wouldn't hesitate to use the weapon again. Emergency responders arrived quickly, but Italo was pronounced dead at the scene. Police interviewed witnesses and were able to identify Fabio as the perpetrator. When officers went to his house, he wasn't there. Fabio's family, upon learning what happened, informed police of where he was likely headed. Authorities intercepted him on his way to the cemetery. Fabio had planned to end his life at Roberta's grave after what he believed was an act of justice over her death. However, police arrived before he could carry out the plan. He didn't resist arrest, showed no emotion, and openly admitted to the crime. At the police station, Fabio broke down. He spoke of his intense love for his wife, Roberta, and his anger with the justice system for allowing Italo to walk free after the car accident that killed her. Then he revealed an even deeper motive. Roberta had been pregnant. Though it was still early in the pregnancy, they had discovered the news just one day before the fatal crash. Roberta had planned to surprise their families with the announcement during dinner, a moment that never came. The accident had taken both her and their unborn child. Fabio said his actions were retaliation for the loss of not just his wife, but also the future they were building. He expressed that he had nothing left to live for, wanting only to reunite with his family. After his arrest, Fabio was sent for psychiatric evaluation. Doctors diagnosed him with acute psychological trauma caused by profound grief. However, the court determined that Fabio had acted deliberately and with full awareness of his actions. He was charged with first-degree premeditated murder. While awaiting trial, Fabio made several attempts to harm himself and was placed under strict supervision. On March 24, 2017, he was found guilty and sentenced to 30 years in prison. Fabio showed no emotion during the verdict, appearing detached from the moment. His family and legal team appealed the sentence, which was later reduced to 20 years. In prison, Fabio reportedly turned to religion for some solace, but never fully recovered from the loss of his wife and unborn child. Anthony Pignataro was born in 1960 in Buffalo, New York, the youngest of 2 brothers. His father, Ralph Pignataro, was a well-known and highly respected surgeon in the community. After finishing high school, he decided to follow in his father's footsteps and applied to several medical schools in the U.S. However, due to his low grades, he was not admitted to any of them. Eventually, he gained acceptance to a medical school in Puerto Rico, where he began his journey toward becoming a doctor. In 1978, 18 years old, Anthony met 21-year-old Deborah at a club during a visit to his hometown. It was love at first sight. Anthony, tall and charming, swept Deborah off her feet as they danced to Donna Summer's Last Dance. Soon after meeting, they began a relationship. Despite their long-distance relationship, while Anthony studied in Puerto Rico and Deborah worked in New York, their love affair continued. Deborah was born and raised in Williamsville, New York, in a financially struggling family. She worked as a pharmacy assistant. In 1985, after graduating as an ENT doctor from medical school in Puerto Rico, Anthony returned to New York, obtained a medical license, and started working as a surgeon at a local hospital. However, his colleagues criticized his skills, calling him incompetent and predicting an unremarkable career. Despite this, he managed to keep his job. That same year, Anthony and Deborah got married. Early in their marriage, Deborah discovered through a friend that Anthony was having an affair. When she confided in her father, he advised her to forgive Anthony, but only once. Deborah decided to give him another chance. Not long after, they welcomed a son, and a year later, a daughter. They moved into a large home in suburban Buffalo, where Anthony started his own surgical practice. He rented office space in a private clinic and began seeing patients. By 1990, 30 years old, Anthony gained attention for inventing a wig prosthesis that was attached to the scalp using metal pins implanted in the skull. He became his own first client, as he had begun losing his hair at the age of 23. This wig became his patented invention. With prices starting at $3,500, clients could choose from a variety of natural and synthetic hair options. This invention contributed to his local fame. Anthony also performed cosmetic surgeries, such as breast augmentations, facelifts, rhinoplasties, liposuctions, and more. His services were competitively priced, and he often ran promotions to attract clients. Over the next 7 years, Anthony became wealthy and locally renowned, even driving a red Lamborghini. However, his reputation concealed the troubling events that were occurring in his operating room. In 1997, Terry Lamarty, a mother of 4, struggled to lose excess belly fat despite regular exercise. On her 39th birthday, her husband gave her a voucher for a belly liposuction treatment at Anthony's clinic. Excited, she scheduled a consultation with Anthony. During their meeting, she was impressed by his charisma and reassurances, which put her at ease. Anthony assured her that the procedure would go smoothly. Terry began preparing for the operation, undergoing necessary medical tests, consulting specialists, and completing the required paperwork. The surgery was scheduled for June 1997. On the day of her scheduled procedure, at 8:30 a.m., Terry's husband drove her to the clinic. Upon arrival, she went to see Anthony to be examined and given medication to prepare for the surgery. He then wheeled her into the clinic's basement, referred to as the surgical center. To Terry's shock, the room looked nothing like a sterile operating theater. It was just an ordinary basement furnished with a couch, a table, and chairs. She didn't see any proper surgical equipment. Feeling uneasy, she tried to express her desire to cancel the operation, but she was already under the effects of the medication. Her speech slurred, and she lost control of her body. Before passing out, she helplessly screamed. Terry regained consciousness at 5 p.m., fully clothed and sitting on a small sofa in the clinic's first-floor waiting room. Her husband arrived shortly after and took her home. Once home, Terry noticed blood running down her legs. Panicked, she examined herself and found a roughly 10 centimeter long and 2 centimeter deep surgical incision on her stomach, poorly closed with about 20 metal staples. Alarmed, she and her husband immediately called Anthony over the phone. He dismissed their concerns, claiming the blood was excess surgical fluid and telling them not to worry. He assured them the wound was minor and advised Terry to rest and visit him the next morning. That night, Terry's pain became unbearable, worsening by the hour. She also experienced severe nausea and vomiting. By morning, she couldn't endure it anymore and called for an ambulance. At the hospital, doctors discovered that Anthony's stitches were blocking blood flow to her abdomen, causing some tissue to necrotize. On top of that, her intestines had been damaged during the procedure, leading to an infection in the wound. Instead of achieving her desired appearance, Terry was now fighting for her life. Fortunately, she received help in time and survived. A few days later, at 2:30 just while Terry was still recovering in the hospital, she was startled awake by Anthony. He had secretly entered her room and was holding her medical records. He demanded that she immediately pack her belongings and leave the hospital. Terrified, Terry refused and argued with him. Hospital nurses overheard the confrontation, and Anthony was forced to leave. After this alarming encounter, Terry remained in the hospital for several more days. Her recovery stretched on for months, and despite doctors reporting the incident to the State Department of Health, Anthony continued practicing medicine. 2 months later, In August 1997, a more tragic event occurred at Anthony's clinic. 26-year-old Sarah Smith, a mother of two, underwent breast implant surgery, a procedure she had long dreamed of. During the operation, Sarah suffered cardiac arrest. Anthony called an ambulance, but when paramedics arrived, they found him trying to clear Sarah's airway using a wire hanger. The clinic lacked even basic life-saving medical equipment, like a ventilation device. Paramedics resuscitated Sarah on site and transported her to the hospital, but she had already fallen into a coma. After a week in intensive care, Sarah passed away on September 1st, 1997. News of Sarah's death quickly spread, sparking a media frenzy. Anthony admitted that Sarah had stopped breathing during the surgery. He said he performed cardiopulmonary resuscitation and injected her with lidocaine, but it was ineffective. Ultimately, he instructed his assistants to call for an ambulance. An investigation by the Herald Police Department revealed that Sarah's death was caused by asphyxia due to severely low oxygen levels, which led to cardiac arrest. A toxicology report further showed that Anthony had administered a dangerously high dose of two muscle-relaxing drugs during the procedure, leaving Sarah unable to breathe on her own. After Sarah's death, the New York State Department of Health suspended Anthony Pignataro's medical license. Shortly thereafter, the Erie County District Attorney's Office in New York launched an investigation. Anthony, who had an inflated self-image, had opened his own plastic surgery clinic but failed to hire an anesthesiologist or adequately trained staff. Instead, his wife, Deborah, assisted him despite having only 6 months of medical training. Additionally, a young female medical student interned at the clinic. During Sarah's procedure, both Deborah and the intern reported that Sarah woke up mid-surgery, screaming. In response, Anthony administered additional drugs, causing Sarah to lose consciousness once again. Deborah noticed that Sarah's oxygen levels had dropped to a dangerously low level and alerted Anthony, but he ignored her and continued the operation. Shortly after, Sarah's lips turned blue. She stopped breathing, and her heart eventually stopped. Investigators interviewed Anthony's colleagues and patients, uncovering a reputation for gross incompetence and recklessness. Many of his patients had suffered complications following surgeries. For instance, 78 years old, Sophie Butring underwent a tummy tuck performed by Anthony. She became ill after the procedure, but was hesitant to seek medical attention. Her son eventually convinced her to go to the hospital, which saved her life. She spent 6 weeks in the hospital, recovering from complications caused by the surgery. The New York State Board of Health eventually filed 30 charges of professional misconduct against Anthony. Investigators discovered that he was not licensed to perform plastic surgery and that his basement clinic was grossly unfit for medical procedures. In January 1998, Anthony, then 38 years old, was arrested. By August of that year, his medical license was permanently revoked. Anthony ultimately accepted a plea deal on a negligent homicide charge and was sentenced to 6 months in prison, fined $5,000, and ordered to complete 250 hours of community service. He was also permanently banned from practicing medicine. As the verdict was announced, the judge ordered Anthony to be taken into custody immediately. Deborah, who was visibly upset in the courtroom, was not allowed to say goodbye to her husband. However, if Deborah had known what lay ahead, she likely would not have shed any tears. In December 1998, Anthony was released from jail. He returned home to live with his wife and children, but struggled to find work. During this time, his mother provided financial support. Despite the challenges, he resumed an extramarital affair, which his wife, Deborah, eventually discovered. Furious, she kicked him out of the house. 2 months later, he returned, begging for a second chance, and she reluctantly took him back. By May 1999, Deborah, then 42 years old, suddenly fell gravely ill. She suffered episodes of nausea and body pain, which gradually worsened to include tingling in her arms and legs, difficulty walking, and extended periods confined to bed. Although Deborah sought medical help, doctors were initially unable to determine the cause of her symptoms. Over the following months, her condition continued to deteriorate. By the summer of 1999, she required a wheelchair and began experiencing memory loss. Anthony claimed her symptoms were caused by a diseased gallbladder, which he insisted needed urgent removal. However, Deborah's physician warned that surgery would be too dangerous and could result in her death. Eventually, toxicology tests revealed lethal levels of arsenic in Deborah's blood. A criminal investigation into Deborah's poisoning was launched. Tests conducted on her hair showed that she had been exposed to approximately 30 grams of arsenic in varying doses since May. During questioning, Deborah recalled that her symptoms began after eating soup Anthony had prepared for her. Investigators suspected Anthony had been poisoning her over time. Deborah granted police permission to search their home, where they discovered ant killer containing arsenic. Further evidence revealed that Anthony had purchased the poison using his credit card. He was subsequently brought in for questioning. Anthony admitted to poisoning Deborah, but suggested that the relatives of his deceased patient, Sarah, who passed away after surgery, might have been involved. Due to insufficient evidence, Anthony was released. Deborah was discharged from the hospital, though she remained in a wheelchair and needed ongoing treatment at home. Later, a former cellmate of Anthony's, who had shared a prison cell with him, contacted the police. The cellmate revealed that Anthony had discussed his wife, Deborah's life insurance policy, and his relationship with his mistress. According to the cellmate, Anthony confessed he wanted to start a new life with his mistress and obtain the insurance payout. He had even asked the cellmate for advice on poisoning someone. Recorded phone conversations confirmed that Anthony maintained contact with the cellmate after his release from prison. With this evidence, Anthony was arrested on May 9, 2000 for attempted murder. While he initially denied poisoning Deborah, he eventually pleaded guilty at the end of 2000. Prosecutors proved that Anthony had been adding small doses of poison to Deborah's food and planning to send her for gallbladder surgery, hoping she would die during the procedure. His motive was to prove he wasn't the only doctor to lose a patient on the operating table, reclaim his reputation, and regain financial success. He also sought to justify Sarah's death. Anthony Pignataro was sentenced to 12 years in prison. While incarcerated, he continued to file lawsuits, claiming that Deborah intentionally consumed arsenic to end her life. However, Deborah refuted this in interviews, stating she would never harm herself and even suggested Anthony should experience arsenic poisoning. Following the trial, she divorced Anthony and obtained a protective order prohibiting him from contacting her or their children. Deborah endured a lengthy recovery process after the poisoning. She revealed in interviews that she suffered lasting health issues, including reduced limb mobility and sensitivity, and required outside assistance for daily life. In December 2013, Anthony was released from prison and moved back to New York, where he worked as a grocery delivery man. He legally changed his name to Tony Hote in 2014, explaining that he wanted a fresh start. By 2016, he launched a cosmetic company and falsely portrayed himself as a practicing doctor on the business website. He marketed a product called the Plasma Protocol, claiming it was the first anti-aging skincare treatment derived from a person's DNA plasma. The company operated near his previous plastic surgery clinic. Neighbors began reporting suspicious activities at Anthony's residence, including deliveries of surgical supplies and frequent visits from women in the evenings. These reports prompted police attention, leading Anthony to shut down his business and move to Palm Beach, Florida, where his brother lived. New York police warned law enforcement in Palm Beach about Anthony, describing him as one of the most dangerous people they had ever encountered. By 2019, Anthony was advertising elder care services online and continued to move freely across the country. Florida authorities monitored him, but there remained concerns about whether he posed a risk to others. As for Deborah, she maintained a private life and struggled with the lasting impact of Anthony's actions, unable to fully recover her health or independence. Binghamton. A small, peaceful city in New York State was once so safe that many families did not need to lock their doors when they went to bed. Children rode their bikes, delivered newspapers, played in the parks. Adults lived slowly and trusted each other. In that place, crime seems a distant thing. But on the afternoon of March 26, 1984, that peace was shattered. A 12-year-old girl disappeared on a familiar street while delivering newspapers. The whole city was in a panic. Hundreds of people rushed to search for her, but to no avail. Until the police opened the door, leading to a dark basement in a seemingly innocuous house, they were faced with a gruesome sight. The girl's body lay there, wrapped in an old blanket, with traces of the crime imprinted on the walls. From that moment on, Binghamton was no longer mentioned as a peaceful city. So, who was the killer, and how could such horror hide behind the walls of an ordinary home? To find the answer, stay with us until the very end of this video. Cherry Lindsay was born on June 6, 1971, in Binghamton, New York, USA. She was one of 4 children. Her father worked in law enforcement, and her mother was a homemaker. Since childhood, she has been a creative, dynamic person and actively participates in community activities. She played the clarinet in the school orchestra, enjoyed board games and softball, and even joined the school's softball team. Despite her busy schedule, she also volunteers at the neonatal unit of a local hospital and volunteers with the American Veterans Association. She dreamed of becoming a veterinarian, neonatologist, or nurse, and she studied and worked hard toward those goals. At age 12, she was in 7th grade and earning good grades. In her free time, Cherry took a part-time job delivering newspapers because she wanted to help others. She planned to save her earnings to throw a party for her favorite teacher, who was expecting a baby. By early 1984, she had been delivering newspapers for about a month. Following a regular route along 2 neighboring streets near her home, residents appreciated her reliability and politeness. She always delivered on time. In the 1,980 seconds, Binghamton was considered a safe city, and many people didn't lock their doors or windows. Cherry's family lives in an area with a low crime rate. Still, her mother often accompanied her on paper routes, and her father, a police officer, encouraged people to be vigilant. On Monday, March 26, 1984, Cherry's mother stayed home to prepare a special dinner and couldn't accompany her. Cherry came home after school and left to deliver papers around 3:30 p.m., promising to return in about an hour so she could call a friend. It was the last time anyone saw her alive. Her mother later carried lifelong guilt for letting her go alone that day. At 4:30 p.m., the phone rang. It was a neighbor boy, a friend of Cherry's, asking to speak with her. Realizing that Cherry hadn't returned as promised, and knowing how punctual she always was, her mother grew concerned. She tried to stay calm, thinking that Cherry might have lost track of time while talking to someone, but she informed her husband. He immediately notified fellow officers to be vigilant and report anything unusual. Following his instructions, Cherry's mother began calling her daughter's friends and relatives. They checked with Cherry's aunt, to whom she was very close, but she hadn't seen her. An hour passed with no news. No one knows where Cherry is, and her parents are very worried. No one had seen Cherry since she left on her regular paper route. Her father and other officers couldn't wait any longer. They began searching the area, focusing on the 2 streets where she usually walked. They also spoke with people along the route, including Cherry's friends. Her best friend reported that they had seen each other from across the street earlier that day and exchanged a quick wave. Cherry stayed focused on her deliveries and didn't stop to chat. This sighting helped investigators narrowed down the timeline of her disappearance. The last time anyone saw Cherry was around 4 p.m. She was alone, and witnesses noticed nothing unusual. Some people assumed she had gone to visit friends and would return soon. Her parent disagreed. She was a homebody, never went out without permission, and all her belongings were still in her room. By 7 p.m., her father, himself a police officer, and other officers had interviewed most residents on the 2 streets where Cherry usually delivered newspapers. They found nothing useful. That evening, the police department alerted the entire city, bringing more officers into the search. By the next morning, firefighters, county and state police, Kminusnina units, and a police helicopter joined in. The search area expanded into the outskirts, but no trace of Cherry was found. Her father was one of the most active searchers. He frequently called home, hoping Cherry had returned, and it was all a misunderstanding. Each time, his wife tearfully told him there was no news, until she remembered something important. She recalled that during her paper route, Cherry was afraid of a house 7 blocks away. A man there always stared at her in a way that gave her goosebumps. Cherry mentioned it to her mother repeatedly. Her father took this lead seriously. Police went to the house, but no one answered the door, and it seemed empty. Without cause to force entry, they had to leave. He kept the address in mind. About 30 hours of unsuccessful searching passed. With no new information, police held a press conference to draw public attention. Several tips came in, but all were dead ends. Soon after, the previously absent resident of that house appeared. Detectives went to see him. He is James Wales, 35 years old. He lives a quiet, normal life and rarely attracts attention. He remembered Cherry, who had delivered his papers, but said he hadn't seen her in days and didn't know where she was. There was no basis to arrest him, but detectives found him unsettling and took interest. With no other leads, they began to focus on him. News of the suspicious resident spread. A local journalist visited James, who let him in and answered questions about Cherry, though he seemed reluctant and quickly grew nervous. The journalist reported his concerns to police on March 27, 1984. Cherry's father ran a records check on James. He had no serious criminal history, only prior incidents of drunk driving and trespassing. The trespassing occurred years earlier when, drunk after leaving a bar, he wandered into a field a few kilometers from home. No one was harmed, and he received a warning. A deeper look revealed something more troubling. Years before Cherry went missing, James lived in Normandy, New York. The files show that the parents of a boy once filed a complaint alleging that James committed abuse. The case was transferred to social services and then closed without law enforcement action. He was never charged. These findings increased suspicion that he might be involved in Cherry's disappearance. Detectives met with him again. They noted he was unusually nervous, dodged direct questions, and avoided eye contact, especially when asked about Cherry, further heightening their concern. Despite James denying he saw Cherry on the day she disappeared, detectives brought him to the station for formal questioning. There, detectives found James uncomfortable communicating, unwilling to cooperate, and almost immediately requested a lawyer. While James was being questioned, his wife also spoke to the police. Convinced that her husband had nothing to do with Cherry's disappearance, she agreed to have her home searched. Investigators soon found a paper bag matching the one Cherry used for her newspapers and Cherry's earrings in a dresser drawer. 2 hours later, the search continued. A detective went down to the basement and discovered what looked like dried blood. In the back of the room, they found a blanket wrapped around a girl's body. It was 12 years old, Cherry Lindsay. She was dead. Meanwhile, at the station, James continued to deny any involvement. James admitted he knew Cherry. Like other neighbors, he received newspapers from her and described her as very punctual. He offered nothing else. When informed about the discovery in his home, he stopped cooperating. Detectives believed his resistance wouldn't last. About 90 minutes later, James confessed. He said Cherry had delivered the newspaper and he lured her inside. She screamed immediately. He tried to silence her by covering her mouth, but she fought back and he began strangling her. As Cherry struggled harder, he grew enraged, grabbed a table leg, and struck her head several times. She lost consciousness, but was still alive. He tied her hands behind her back, stuffed her t-shirt in her mouth, opened the basement door, and threw her down the stairs. Cherry sustained more injuries in the fall. James followed her downstairs, wrapped a clothesline around her neck, and continued strangling her for several minutes. When she showed no signs of life, he abused her without removing the rope. He claimed he had not intended to kill her and blamed the attack on uncontrollable, impulsive violence. He then returned to his routine, finished cooking dinner, and went back to the basement. About 15 minutes later, unsure if Cherry was dead, he used the rope still around her neck to make certain. He hung her from a sewer pipe for about half an hour. Afterward, he wrapped her body, clothes, and some belongings in a blanket, collected her newspapers and the money she had earned that day, showered, changed, and removed the clothes he had worn during the crime. He went to the basement several more times to check if she was dead. His calm, detached description of these actions suggested a complete lack of remorse. Ironically, 35 years old, James was the same man who had helped Cherry with her paper route. Though Cherry had found him creepy and strange and was wary of him, he had shown her the route for delivering newspapers. Investigators now suspect this was part of a plan to gain her trust and lure her to her death. To understand how he came to commit such a crime, police examined his background. They quickly learned James's life was marked by violence. His father died when he was young. His stepfather was abusive and drank heavily. His mother, also an alcoholic, joined in punishing him rather than protecting him. James started drinking in school and later used illegal substances. James was a troubled teenager who repeatedly tried to flee his abusive parents. Despite multiple reports of domestic violence, law enforcement took no action. At 17, he finally escaped from his mother and stepfather and enlisted in the United States of America Army. He served for 6 years and earned honors and awards. He returned to Norway in 1972 and married 3 times. His last wife was Sue Ellen. They had 2 children and, for a time, lived a normal life. After leaving the army, he worked at International Business Machines, but lost his job in 1983 due to long-standing alcohol and banned substance abuse. After being fired, his mental health deteriorated. His wife tried to support him, but they never sought professional help. He displayed paranoia and delusions, yet no official diagnosis was made, and he received no treatment. According to his wife and witnesses, he was a ticking time bomb, warnings that went unheeded until it was too late. Investigators later discovered that James had an unexpected accomplice. He had not forced Cherry into his house. She went there willingly. However, her family insisted that she would never have gone with such a suspicious man of her own accord. James had used his 11-year-old stepson, Brian. Knowing approximately when Cherry delivered newspapers, James watched for a moment when she was alone. When he saw her without her mother, he told Brian to help. Brian, who knew Cherry, invited her inside. During police questioning, Brian admitted that James had ordered him to do this. As soon as Cherry entered, James appeared and told Brian to leave. The boy ran to his upstairs room. He feared something terrible would happen, but stayed silent out of fear. After James confessed to the murder, police returned to the house to gather corroborating evidence in case he later recanted. Inside, they found Cherry's newspapers and the money she had collected, both stolen by James. Blood on the basement floor and wall indicated she had been beaten and thrown down the stairs. They recovered a blood-stained sewer pipe used to hang her, along with pieces of clothesline and fragments of her clothing. Evidence also showed the murder was premeditated. Before Cherry began her paper route, James did not subscribe to that newspaper. He subscribed only after she started working. Witnesses said he fixated on her, even following and observing her route. Based on this evidence, on April 6, 1984, James Wales was charged with second-degree murder, abuse, kidnapping, burglary, and abuse of a corpse. He was arrested, held in the county jail, and denied bail as a particularly dangerous offender. Unable to afford an attorney, he was assigned a public defender. The defense first sought his release on bail and requested a change of venue due to extensive local publicity that could compromise an impartial jury. Both requests were denied. The defense then filed an insanity plea. In 1984, the state governor signed a bill revising the standard for insanity defenses, shifting the burden to showing the defendant did not understand right from wrong. The attorney believed this was James's only chance to avoid a life sentence. The trial, initially set for July 30, 1984, was postponed multiple times at the defense's request. The trial finally began on October 18, 1984. The prosecutor presented detailed evidence: the rope used to strangle Cherry, a table leg with her blood, and James's confession, which he later tried to retract by claiming insanity. The evidence also included the newspapers and money he took after the murder. During the hearing, a defense psychiatrist testified that he believed James was insane, diagnosing him with intermittent explosive disorder, a relatively common condition marked by unpredictable anger and violent outbursts. At the time, about 200,000 people in the United States had been diagnosed with this disorder. According to the expert, James could not resist his impulses to do harm. The psychiatrist said that during multiple meetings with James in jail, he observed a range of disturbing symptoms. In one session, James claimed that during the murder, he believed he was attacking his mother, not Cherry. He blamed his mother for his abusive childhood, hated her, and wanted revenge. The psychiatrist concluded that James was unable to consider the consequences of his actions or control himself at the time of the crime. Two of James's ex-wives also testified. They said he had a tendency toward violence that could take disturbing forms. For example, James likes to strangle during intimacy and has a hard time stopping. The court then heard a detailed account of the murder and the horrors Cherry endured. Cherry's parents struggled to listen. The medical examiner testified that it took about 30 minutes for her to die from strangulation. Based on James's own timeline, even when he hung Cherry in the basement, she may still have been alive. Brian also testified against James. These events were deeply traumatic for 11-year-old Brian. He said he heard screams and muffled thuds. Cherry cried for help, and then it went quiet. Brian was too scared to leave the room because he knew how cruel James could be. He feared he would be attacked next. After 11 days of trial, the jury began deliberations. Notably, the jury did not see all the evidence investigators gathered. The judge excluded crime scene photos of Cherry, her torn clothing, and the marks left on her body, believing such shocking images might prevent the jury from remaining impartial. After 3 hours and 15 minutes, the jury returned a guilty verdict on all counts. The insanity defense failed. On November 12 of that year, James Wales was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 33 years, the maximum allowed by state law. In his final statement, He said he was sorry, but it sounded unconvincing. As throughout the trial, James remained impassive and showed no emotion. When issuing the sentence, the judge, citing the brutality of the crime, urged the state never to grant James parole. However, James qualified for the first time in 2017. Cherry's parents could not accept this loss. They moved out of the family home and eventually put it up for sale. By then, the house had a grim reputation. Many believed Cherry's spirit was unsettled and that strange events occurred there. The house became known as haunted. Twice, new residents abandoned it, and neighbors reported moving objects, voix, and unexplained sounds. On July 30, 2020, the ghost house was demolished. At that moment, Cherry's mother also discarded her daughter's newspaper bag, deciding it was finally time to let her go. Cherry's father, however, believed her spirit would only be at peace once the killer died behind bars. The city council honored Cherry's memory in 1984 by naming a local park after her and installing a small memorial there. James was first granted parole on April 12, 2017. Like any American inmate, he could appear before a parole board, and he exercised that right. His hearings were met with public protests organized by Cherry's parents. James told the board he struggled with stress, had a difficult childhood due to his abusive grandfather, and believed he would never have killed Cherry if not for a mental health crisis. Despite his statements, the parole board denied his release. Cherry's parents continued to hold public demonstrations, calling for him to remain imprisoned for life. Ahead of each new hearing, they intensified their efforts to seek justice for their daughter. 3 years later, James became eligible for parole again. A supporter of Cherry and her family launched an online petition that gathered more than 9,000 signatures. In total, 409 pages of signatures and 120 pages of comments were submitted to the board. James was denied parole a second time. And again, in 2023, law enforcement maintained that he should remain behind bars for life. Another hearing was scheduled for 2025. Throughout this period, Cherry's family appealed to the public, doing everything they could to prevent his release. On February 28, 2023, Cherry's father died at age 81 after a brief battle with liver cancer. Before his death, he asked that James never be released. In 2025, James was denied parole again. The next hearing is scheduled for 2 years later. Cherry's mother and others fear that in 2027, the board may consider releasing James, in part because of the terminal illness he has suffered from for years. Although the family's leading advocate, Cherry's father, has passed away, his cause continues online and in person. Many supporters, including Cherry's mother, remain determined to ensure that James is never released from prison. In Cottonwood Heights, Utah, at 11:47 p.m., a call was secretly recorded. During that conversation, Jennifer confessed to her lover that she had killed her husband, Matthew. From that moment on, the truth about a seemingly perfect marriage began to emerge, leading to one of the most shocking family crimes in Utah. Jennifer Gledhill and Matthew Johnson seemed to have it all. Living in their million-dollar home in Cottonwood Heights, Utah, they appeared to be the perfect family, a devoted military husband and a caring mother, raising their 3 children, aged 11, 7, and 5. Matthew, 51, was a respected member of the Utah National Guard's 19th Special Forces Group. Known for his reliability and brilliance, his fellow soldiers said he was the kind of man they could always count on for answers. Jennifer, 42, was seen as a devoted mother and supportive military wife, whom many of Matthew's friends described as nice and rather reclusive. But beneath the surface, Their marriage had begun to fracture months earlier. In August 2024, Jennifer filed for a temporary protective order against Matthew, claiming she needed protection from him. Yet, when the case reached 3rd District Commissioner Russell Minus, he dismissed the request. The commissioner noted that text messages from Jennifer to Matthew were repeatedly berating, belittling, and demeaning, if not outright attempts, to goad him into a violent response on the 16th of September, 2024, just days before the tragedy that would shatter their family forever. Commissioner Minus dismissed the protective order, ruling that no abuse had occurred. In the weeks leading up to September, Matthew's friends noticed changes. Jennifer's behavior had become so erratic that Matthew sometimes stayed overnight at a National Guard facility, telling those close to him that he feared for his safety. In one of his final conversations with a longtime friend, retired Guardsman Kevin Thompson, Matthew said he was ready to move on and file for divorce. Behind his back, Jennifer was living a double life. She was deeply involved in an affair with another man, an affair so intense that it consumed her thoughts. On the 19th of September, just days before Matthew's death, Jennifer showed her lover a loaded Glock 19X she kept in the home. At the time, he brushed it off. Firearms weren't unusual in a military family, but prosecutors later argued this was part of a calculated plan. She had arranged for their 3 children to stay at her parents' house the night she planned to kill Matthew. The stage was being set for a confrontation that would end in tragedy. The 20th of September, 2024, began like any other day. But by evening, the fragile facade of the marriage would finally crumble. Matthew had discovered the truth about his wife's affair, and witnesses would later report hearing a heated argument between the couple that night. According to Jennifer's later confession, Matthew confronted her, yelling because he knew she had been sleeping with someone else. The argument was intense, years of marital problems finally exploding into the open. What happened next would haunt everyone who learned about it. In the early hours of the 21st of September, 2024, as Matthew lay sleeping in their master bedroom, completely vulnerable and unaware of the danger, Jennifer made a decision that would destroy him forever. She took his own 9mm handgun and shot him in the head while he slept. By her own confession, she then put Matthew's body into a rooftop storage container, sliding it down the stairs of their home before loading it into the back of their minivan. She smashed his phone and drove his truck to a nearby neighborhood, abandoning it blocks from their home. Then, in what can only be described as a methodical cover-up, Jennifer drove north with her husband's body and buried him in a shallow grave at a location that remains unknown to this day. When she returned home, she began an extensive cleanup operation. She bleached the walls, used carpet cleaning supplies throughout the master bedroom, and ordered a new mattress to replace the blood-soaked one where Matthew had been killed. The mattress arrived just 2 days later, but Jennifer's most critical mistake was yet to come. On the 22nd of September, just before midnight, Jennifer showed up at her lover's home and made a confession that would ultimately lead to her arrest. She told him everything: how she had killed Matthew, how she had disposed of his body, and how she had cleaned up the crime scene. The man noticed bruises on Jennifer's body during their conversation, and when he asked about them, she casually explained that she had gotten them while burying her husband and cleaning the house of evidence. Her lover was terrified by what he had heard. Jennifer, whom he thought he knew, had just confessed to cold-blooded murder with an almost casual demeanor. The truth was about to come out, and it was worse than anyone imagined. Jennifer's lover was so disturbed by her confession that he decided to record their next phone conversation. When he told Jennifer that he was frightened by what she had told him, her response was chilling and would become one of the most haunting pieces of evidence in the case. She exclaimed that she thinks she could even hurt a fly. and said that Matthew's not a person. He wasn't a person anymore. The cold detachment in her voice was unmistakable. She had dehumanized her husband so completely that his death meant nothing to her. But Jennifer's disturbing revelations didn't stop there. When her lover asked if she would do anything differently if she could turn back time, Jennifer replied, no. She also asked her lover not to think of her as a monster and to remember who she was before the confession. The irony was not lost. She was asking for understanding after confessing to murdering the father of her children in cold blood. What made this conversation even more significant was that it took place before Matthew was officially reported missing. Jennifer was already referring to her husband in the past tense. Even though no one else knew he was dead, 6 days after confessing to her lover, Jennifer finally reported Matthew missing to the police. She told them that Matthew had said he would be gone for a week and instructed her not to call him. Meanwhile, the Utah National Guard had already begun searching for Matthew when he failed to report for duty on the 23rd of September. Unbeknownst to Jennifer, her lover had been collecting evidence against her, including screenshots of their text messages and recordings of their phone conversations. On the 2nd of October, 2024, he contacted the police with information that would crack the case wide open. On the 2nd of October, 2024, armed with the recorded confessions and physical evidence, police arrested Jennifer Gledhill on charges of first-degree murder and obstruction of justice. When Cottonwood Heights, Utah police executed a search warrant on the Gledhill home, they discovered a scene that told a very different story than the one Jennifer had presented. In the master bedroom, investigators found a large blood-stained spot on the carpet beneath the bed. Blood was also found on the bed frame slats, which corroborated Jennifer's confession to her lover. The house reeked of bleach, and there were reddish-brown stains on the walls, bed frame, and blinds. Tellingly, the mattress in the bedroom was brand new. Phone records later revealed that Jennifer had ordered it on the 24th of September, just 3 days after the murder. It had been delivered 2 days later. During the investigation, police also discovered GPS data from Jennifer's phone showing her movements on the 21st of September and 22nd. The data showed her traveling to the location where Matthew's truck was found at around 6:00 a.m., and later tracking her journey north toward Davis County, exactly where she claimed to have buried his body. But the investigation was far from over. On the 24th of October, 2024, Jennifer's parents, Thomas Gledhill, 71, and Rosalie Gledhill, 68, were also arrested and charged with 4 counts of obstruction of justice. Police discovered that they had spent over 5 hours at Jennifer's house in late September, despite initially claiming they were only there for less than an hour to pick up clothing. Investigators found that Rosalie had purchased the new mattress and had her phone remotely reset, erasing all data about her whereabouts during the cleanup period. When police questioned Thomas about the master bedroom and the alleged cleanup, he said he did not go in where the incident happened, inadvertently revealing knowledge of a crime scene. During a search of Jennifer's parents' home, police found a Glock 19X gun box wrapped in a child's onesie inside a plastic tote near Jennifer's bedroom. The container matched the description of the gun Jennifer had shown to her lover on the 19th of September. The family had tried to cover up the perfect murder, but their web of lies was quickly unraveling. Months have passed since Jennifer's arrest, but Matthew Johnson's body remains missing. Extensive search efforts have covered multiple counties, extending from Davis counties all the way to Box Elder County near the Utah border. Over 70 searchers have participated in the ongoing efforts to find Matthew, including law enforcement, volunteers, and Matthew's own military friends who have organized their own search parties. As his friend Kevin Thompson said, the fact that the search is now in its 5th month keeps them up at night. John Hash, Matthew's fellow Green Beret, who served with him for 12 years, has been frustrated by the ongoing search efforts. He said, having had Jennifer in his home before, breaking bread with them. It turned out she's responsible for Matthew's death. It was shocking. Frankly, during recent court hearings, prosecutors revealed that a vehicle storage container had been found floating in water and it contained Matthew's blood inside. This discovery provided additional physical evidence linking Jennifer to the crime, but Matthew's body still hasn't been recovered. The search continues to expand across northern Utah as investigators follow every lead, hoping to finally bring Matthew home to his family. They were about to discover a secret Jennifer had hoped would never see the light of day. Jennifer Gledhill has pleaded not guilty to all charges against her. She faces 1 count of first-degree murder, 5 counts of obstruction of justice, 1 count of possession of a controlled substance, 1 count of abuse or desecration of a human body, and 1 count of tampering with a witness. During her bail hearing, prosecutors argued that Jennifer posed a significant danger to the community and to the integrity of the investigation. They revealed that she had told her lover she would shoot herself rather than go to jail, demonstrating both her desperation and potential for further violence. The judge sided with the prosecutors and denied Jennifer's request for bail, noting the risk she posed to the community. She remains in custody at the Salt Lake County Jail. Adding another layer of complexity to the case is the matter of Matthew's $500,000 Prudential life insurance policy, with Jennifer named as the beneficiary. Because Jennifer is facing murder charges and Matthew's body is still missing, Prudential has asked the court to determine who should receive the money. Jennifer's trial is scheduled to begin on the 8th of December, 2025, and is expected to last 8 days. Perhaps the most heartbreaking aspect of this case is the plight of the 3 children who have lost both parents, 1 to murder and 1 to imprisonment. Matthew Johnson's family has released a statement through their victim representative saying they are hopeful that they will find Matthew soon, or that Jennifer or someone will come forward with the location of his body so they can properly lay him to rest. The prosecution's theory is straightforward but chilling. Jennifer Gledhill killed her husband because he discovered her affair, and she wanted to be free to pursue her relationship with her lover rather than go through a messy divorce that might have resulted in shared custody and financial obligations. She chose murder. As we await Jennifer Gledhill's trial in December 2025, one question haunts everyone involved in this case. How does a mother of 3 justify destroying so many lives for the sake of an affair? Perhaps we'll never fully understand the depths of her selfishness and cruelty. What we do know is that her actions have created wounds that will never fully heal. Justice may eventually be served, but Matthew Johnson will never come home to his children, and somewhere in northern Utah, a devoted father and soldier lies in an unmarked grave, waiting for someone to finally tell the truth about where he can be found. The candle had barely burned when the wax had already left its mark on cold skin. Beside the bed, 2 knives were still stained with blood. In a small apartment in Las Vegas, the body of Herline Dulai lay motionless after a night of so-called purification rituals. For those who knew Herline, a passionate fitness trainer, a warm and inspiring woman, her death was not only brutal, but also hauntingly unbelievable. Having come to Las Vegas to start her life over, Herline embarked on a journey to find spiritual balance, but the place she hoped to find enlightenment turned into a pit of tragedy, and the person who accompanied her on that journey, Ash Armand, a former star of the show Gigolos, was the one who dragged her into a spiral of death. Herline Dulai was born in 1991 in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. She grew up in a close-knit family, surrounded by supportive parents and siblings. Naturally outgoing and warm, she easily connected with people. Friends and colleagues admired her for her empathy, encouragement, and ability to inspire positivity in others. From childhood, Herline was curious and eager to explore many interests, but her deepest passion was science and health. She pursued biology in college, envisioning a career in medicine or research. Yet, after graduating, she realized that life behind a desk or in a lab was not the future she wanted. That realization pushed her to make a bold change, relocating to Las Vegas, a city known for its energy, opportunity, and relentless pace. For Herline, Vegas was more than just a move. It was a reinvention. Shortly after arriving, she immersed herself in fitness. Within months, she had transformed not only her body, but also her confidence. That personal journey sparked a calling. She became a certified personal trainer, determined to help others unlock their potential. Her career flourished quickly. Clients valued her encouragement, guidance, and unwavering support. To them, she wasn't just designing workouts. She was a motivator, a confidante, and a partner in transformation. Colleagues admired her energy, her optimism, and her unique ability to find common ground with anyone she met. But beneath the bright surface, Herline wrestled with deeper questions. After the move, she often pondered life's purpose, searching for meaning beyond her daily routines. This led her to explore spiritual practices and alternative healing. She became fascinated by meditation, energy work, philosophical ideas about inner balance, and higher states of awareness. The more she delved into these realms, the more drawn she became to the notion of transcending ordinary reality. Through this new path, she found herself in a different social circle. Among those she met was a man who shared her hunger for deeper knowledge. Their conversations revolved around spirituality, energy, and uncovering hidden truths. At first, the exchanges felt inspiring, but over time, they began to take a darker turn. Ash Armand, birth name is Akshaya Kubiak, had a magnetic charisma. Confident and articulate, he could adapt to any conversation, making those around him feel seen and understood, always the center of attention. He projected the aura of someone who had glimpsed higher truths. He often spoke about consciousness, energy, and existence, eager to share his beliefs with anyone willing to listen. Herline was captivated by his worldview. She felt that he understood her yearning and that with him, she might unlock something greater. Their talks quickly evolved into a deeper connection. Together, they explored practices meant to quiet the mind, dismantle inner barriers, and reject social constraints they believed held them back. In time, however, his ideas grew more radical. He argued that traditional self-improvement was shallow, claiming that true enlightenment required abandoning fear, breaking mental chains, and venturing into altered states of perception. He insisted that real awareness lay beyond the boundaries of ordinary experience. That was when their retreats began. They ventured to remote spots outside the city, places where they could disconnect from the outside world. There, Herline experimented with new methods of self-discovery. Gradually, these practices took a more dangerous turn. Psychoactive substances entered the picture, presented as keys to higher consciousness, tools to break free from ordinary reality. Under their influence, she slipped into altered states, convinced she was glimpsing profound truths. Each experience felt like a journey into deeper understanding, yet the line between clarity and illusion grew thinner. Perception became unstable, reality uncertain. These journeys were intoxicating, but they slowly pulled her further away from the life she once knew. At some point, her search for harmony shifted into something far more perilous. She may not have realized how far she had drifted, but step by step, she was being drawn into a world she could not easily escape. By then, the path back to the life she had built seemed impossibly out of reach. Helene and Ash grew close quickly, their bond intensifying in a way that felt almost fated. In the early days, their connection seemed effortless, filled with conversations about spirituality, self-discovery, and the search for higher meaning. Yet as time passed, small cracks began to appear, warning signs that at first seemed too minor to matter. Ash could be affectionate and attentive, speaking with warmth and insight, but then, without warning, he would grow cold and unapproachable. His moods shifted like quicksilver. Sometimes he spoke with dazzling conviction, as if unveiling the universe's deepest secrets. At other times, he snapped at the smallest things, retreating into silence for hours, even days. There were occasions when he vanished altogether, ignoring Helene's calls and messages, only to resurface, claiming he had needed time alone to cleanse his spirit and release the energies he had absorbed from others. Helene wanted to understand him, but these erratic disappearances left her increasingly uneasy. The more time they spent together, the more Ash pressed her to abandon the beliefs and frameworks she had once relied on. He claimed logic was a trap, that true growth could only be achieved by silencing reason and embracing pure intuition. His words grew steadily stranger. He spoke of shadowy forces, of people infected with dark energy that held humanity back from evolution. Most troubling of all was his fixation on Helene herself. He insisted there was something inside her that needed to be purged, an imbalance in her energy field that blocked her from achieving enlightenment. According to him, she could only reach her full potential if she trusted him completely and allowed him to guide the process of cleansing. By the summer of 2020, his behavior had become increasingly erratic. Some days, he claimed to see visions of her future or to read her private thoughts with ease. Other days, he was consumed by suspicion, demanding that she trust only him and no one else. At times, he was an inspiring mentor, radiating confidence, while at other times, he was volatile, irritable, and withdrawn. What unsettled Helene most, however, was his growing obsession with rituals. He described ancient ceremonies that, he said, had the power to strip away all inner barriers. Only by participating in these rituals, he insisted, could a person truly free themselves from illusions and embrace reality. At first, Helene dismissed this as another one of his philosophical digressions, but soon, the pressure mounted. He began urging her to take part, telling her that only absolute trust in him could allow her to transcend her limits. Gradually, she realized these conversations were no longer abstract. His strange beliefs weren't confined to talk, they had begun to shape his every action, and by extension, their relationship. He demanded not just her attention, but her obedience. He expected her to surrender completely, body, mind, and spirit, to his methods and his worldview. On the evening of July 15, 2020, Helene was with Ash at his apartment in Las Vegas. That night was supposed to be dedicated to what he called a spiritual cleansing session. He told her the time had finally come to cast aside all boundaries, to achieve the higher state of consciousness they had long spoken of. To prepare, he insisted that she take a powerful dose of psychoactive substances only under their influence. He claimed, could she achieve true clarity and connection with the hidden dimensions of existence? Helene hesitated. A wave of unease swept over her. Every instinct told her to refuse, but Ash's pressure was relentless. Against her better judgment, she gave in. This was not the first time she had experimented under his guidance, but there was something different about this night. The dose was larger, more dangerous, more extreme. Within minutes, the effects overtook her. The world began to unravel. Objects blurred and dissolved into shifting shapes, sounds grew distorted, vibrating with unnatural intensity. Her perception collapsed into chaos as the drug surged through her body. Ash, by contrast, seemed exhilarated. His words tumbled out in a frantic, rapid stream. He declared that his mind had broken free of its limits, that he could see beyond the physical world into some higher plane of truth. His eyes burned with a manic light, his voice rising with fevered intensity. But for Herline, the experience was terrifying. Her visions did not bring peace or understanding. They brought panic. Anxiety gripped her chest. Her body trembled, and her mind spun into a vortex of fear. She tried desperately to ground herself, to fight her way back to stability. But her body would not obey. The night that began as a promise of enlightenment was descending into something darker, something from which there would be no return. Ash's behavior grew more unstable with each passing hour. At one point, he turned to Herline with a piercing gaze, his voice low but edged with menace. He said he sensed something unnatural about her, insisting that she was engulfed in dark energy that needed to be cleansed. When she tried to object, his agitation only escalated. He accused her of resisting, of blocking the release of negative energy. His words tumbled out faster, sharper, more threatening. With every sentence, his obsession deepened, and the atmosphere in the room thickened with dread. Herline attempted to calm him, but his mind was no longer reachable. The stimulant had clouded his judgment, and he was consumed by the belief that he needed to act immediately. In a sudden burst of aggression, Ash seized her wrist. She tried to pull away, but his grip, fueled by adrenaline and frenzy, was overpowering. With a violent shove, he sent her crashing to the floor. The assault escalated with terrifying speed. Violence seemed to surge through him in waves. Grabbing a heavy glass candlestick from a nearby table, he struck her again and again. Her head dropped limp, her body trembling in convulsions. Yet he didn't stop. In a horrifying frenzy, he reached for knives and other objects, inflicting savage wounds. Only when Herline's breathing ceased, when the spark of life had completely left her body, did the rampage end. A chilling silence fell over the Las Vegas apartment. Ash stood frozen, his stimulant-fueled mania slowly giving way to a grim awareness of what had just unfolded. Blood was everywhere. On the floor, on his clothes, staining his hands. The stench of death was thick in the air. For hours he lingered in that apartment, pacing, staring at her body, as if searching for a way to undo what had already been done. But there was no undoing it. On the morning of July 16, 2020, a call was made to emergency services. The man on the line, Ash Armand, spoke with an uneven tone. There was tension in his voice, but not the panic one would expect from someone who had just witnessed a tragedy. He told the dispatcher that his partner was dead, claiming it had been an accident and that he had tried to help her. But it was too late. Police arrived within minutes. Ash himself answered the door. His appearance stunned them. His clothes were stained with blood, his expression weary, detached. He showed no visible signs of panic or despair, only a cold exhaustion. Inside, the scene was one of chaos and violence. On the floor lay the lifeless body of Herline Dulai, her skin pale, her face and neck marred by dark bruises. Her arms bore deep scratches, surrounded by smears of dried blood. The disarray of the room left little doubt. A brutal struggle had taken place, but the bathroom told a different story. It was eerily clean, almost scrubbed. Investigators noticed faint smudges of blood on the tiles, but most surfaces had been wiped. In the washing machine, they discovered clothing stained with blood. Ash's own outfit appeared to have been recently laundered, suggesting a hurried attempt to conceal evidence. 2 unlit candles stood by the bed, Disturbingly, investigators found traces of melted wax on Herlene's skin, an inexplicable and chilling detail. On the bedside table lay two knives, one a kitchen blade, the other a folding knife, both still caked with dried blood. It is clear that someone tried to erase the truth but failed. Officers also uncovered a suitcase packed with personal items, cash, and documents. The discovery suggested Ash had intended to flee, but had either changed his mind or run out of time. When questioned, his statements were erratic and contradictory. At times, he claimed he remembered nothing. Moments later, he insisted Herlene had attacked him first and that he was only defending himself. However, his body had no scratches or injuries. Nothing to corroborate the story of his struggle. The police kept a close eye on Ash's behavior. He showed no visible emotion, asked for no help, and never expressed genuine shock at what had taken place. Meanwhile, forensic experts continued combing through the crime scene. In the refrigerator, they discovered several bottles of alcohol. On the table, they found traces of a powdery substance, later confirmed to be a banned substance. Step by step, the picture began to form. Someone had clearly tried to destroy evidence, but the attempt was careless and incomplete. Everything pointed to the crime having been committed under the influence of psychoactive substances. While investigators documented the evidence, Ash was placed in the back of a patrol car. He didn't resist or protest. The investigation was still in its early stages, yet authorities already had little doubt. His version of events, centered on self-defense, simply didn't stand up to scrutiny. Detectives immediately began to dig into Ash Armand's past. The inquiry soon uncovered striking details of his biography. Ash's real name was Akshaya Kubiak. He was born in 1981 in India and spent his early years moving between Japan and the United States. From a young age, his parents introduced him to meditation, alternative medicine, and spiritual practices. As a teenager, he immersed himself in Eastern philosophy, became fascinated with esoteric teachings, trained in massage and energy healing techniques. The turning point in his life came in 2011, when he caught the attention of Gareth James, the owner of a luxury escort agency. Ash's striking looks and confident demeanor made him a natural fit for the world of high-end companionship. This led him to Las Vegas, where he was quickly swept into a lifestyle of wealthy clients, lavish parties, and easy money. By 2012, he was invited to join the reality TV show Gigolos, which gave him both national exposure and financial success. But with fame came pressure, the constant public attention, rivalry among castmates, and the demands of the escort industry began to weigh heavily on him. To maintain his image as a desirable, larger-than-life figure, Ash turned to steroids to enhance his physique. Eventually, he escalated to harder substances. His dependence on external validation soon mixed with a growing addiction to banned substance. As the years went by, his behavior grew increasingly unstable. He was involved in bar fights, had several altercations in Las Vegas nightclubs, and was arrested for driving under the influence. When Gigolos ended in 2016, his popularity faded rapidly. Income streams dried up, and his attempts to stay relevant in the media world failed. The fortune he had made during his years of fame was quickly squandered on luxury cars, wild parties, and an indulgent lifestyle. By 2020, his life was a shadow of what it once was. Once a recognized TV personality, he was now renting a modest apartment and scraping together income by meeting fans of the show who were willing to pay for his company. When he met Herlene Dulai, he was already spiraling. In his desperation, he turned once more to spiritual practices and mysticism, convincing himself that he had the ability to manipulate energy and bend reality. But under the grip of banned substance, these ideas twisted into dangerous delusions. His relationship with Herlene became less about love and more about control. To him, she was not only a partner, but someone he could dominate and mold. Over time, his conviction hardened into obsession. He believed he could not only influence her thoughts, but dictate her destiny. That July night, with his mind corroded by years of substance abuse and self-deception, the fragile balance finally shattered. Investigators assembled the puzzle of his life piece by piece, and the deeper they looked, the clearer it became. This was no random crime. Ash had been on a collision course with tragedy for years. His trial began in 2021. Prosecutors charged Ash Armand with murder, arguing that Herline Dulai was the victim of a savage, deliberate attack, and that self-defense was incompatible with the evidence. The defense, in turn, leaned on claims of temporary insanity. Ash's lawyers argued that he had lost control of his actions due to banned substance and an emotional breakdown, insisting that he never intended to kill her. In court, Ash himself maintained that he loved Herline and would never have deliberately harmed her. Public reaction was sharply divided. Many, upon learning the disturbing details of the case, condemned the sheer brutality of the crime and demanded the harshest punishment possible. Yet, a portion of Ash's fans from the Gigolos reality show continued to stand by him. They insisted he was a victim of circumstance rather than a cold-blooded killer. Supporters voiced their opinions on social media, and some even organized fundraising groups to help finance his legal defense. Herline's family, meanwhile, fought relentlessly for justice. Her parents and sisters gave emotional interviews describing her as a vibrant, compassionate woman whose life had been stolen by a man who exploited her trust. They emphasized that no argument, whether about banned substance, stress, or mental health, could erase the cruelty of his actions or diminish his responsibility. In December 2021, the court delivered its verdict. Ash Armand was found guilty of the voluntary manslaughter of Herline Dulai and sentenced to 20 years in prison. Under state law, he would be eligible for parole after serving 8 years. For Herline's loved ones, the ruling was bittersweet. They expressed deep disappointment, calling the punishment far too lenient given the horror of the crime. The court, however, had considered the defense's arguments regarding Ash's impaired mental state at the time of the killing, and this factor influenced the final sentence. According to the judgment, Ash will remain incarcerated until 2041, although he could potentially be released as early as 2029 if granted parole. Whether or not parole will ever be approved remains uncertain, a question that continues to haunt Herline's family. Just before dawn, while the world still slept, the sound of a single engine broke the calm near the Foix Reservoir. Moments later, the night exploded into chaos. Flames devoured the vehicle, and thick smoke rose into the sky like a desperate plea for help. When firefighters arrived, they expected a routine car fire. Instead, they found a horror, a body, burned beyond recognition, locked inside the trunk. This wasn't an accident. Someone hadn't just tried to destroy a car, they'd tried to erase a person. The victim was a police officer, once sworn to protect others, now reduced to ashes by someone he trusted. Who could commit such a calculated, merciless act? As investigators retraced his final hours, a chilling story began to unfold. A tale of love turned toxic, jealousy that spiraled into rage, and a secret pact destined to destroy lives. This was no random crime. It was a personal betrayal of the deepest kind, one that would shake Spain and expose how far people will go to keep their lies hidden. Once you step into this story, you may never see love the same way again. Pedro Rodriguez was born in Barcelona into a troubled family. His relationship with his father and sister was distant, leaving him emotionally close only to his mother and his brother, Juan Antonio. After their mother's death, Juan became Pedro's most important spiritual and emotional support. From a young age, Pedro was passionate about motorcycles and sports. He was healthy, active, and strong-willed, and chose to pursue a career that suited his love of movement and discipline. In 2008, he joined the traffic division of the Guardia Urbana, the police force responsible for law enforcement within Barcelona. His brother followed a similar path, training to become a police officer as well. In Spain, the Guardia Urbana handles work in the city of Barcelona, while the national police cover other areas. In 2014, Pedro married Patricia and had a son, but the marriage did not last. Over the next few years, Patricia noticed a change in Pedro. He became cold, distant, and rumored to be having an affair. Friends told her they had seen him with another woman, who had 2 daughters. The couple's arguments became constant, and by 2016, Pedro asked for a divorce. He denied having another relationship, but soon after, he moved to another town to live with Rosa Peral. She is also an officer in the Metropolitan Police and has 2 children from a previous marriage. On May 4, 2017, Pedro's car and body were discovered burned near the Foix River Reservoir. Investigators confirmed Pedro's identity using forensic equipment, and some of his work items were found in the trunk. The speed and thoroughness of the crime made finding evidence extremely difficult. After confirming Pedro's death, investigators contacted his ex-wife Patricia. She stated that she and Pedro had separated long before, and that he was living with a co-worker from the police force. Investigators soon discovered that Pedro had been temporarily suspended from duty after assaulting a man who had ignored a traffic checkpoint, an incident captured on video. Rosa, meanwhile, was on medical leave at the time due to depression. When questioned, Rosa said the last time she saw Pedro, they argued and he left the house. She claimed he often disappeared for several days after their fights and had a volatile temper. When the police informed Rosa that Pedro was dead, her reaction was surprisingly calm. She refused to come to the police station, saying she couldn't leave her daughters alone, but agreed to go the next day. From that point onward, suspicion began to fall on her. On May 5th, Rosa gave her first official statement, suggesting that the mafia might be responsible for Pedro's death, an explanation investigators found unfounded. In a later statement, she admitted that she and Pedro had been together for about 8 months. Rosa said that 2 days before his death, they argued about Pedro's jealousy toward her ex-husband. She claimed he left afterward, but later sent her a message apologizing and professing his love. According to her, their relationship often followed this pattern of jealousy, arguments, silence, and reconciliation. For that reason, she said she wasn't immediately worried when he disappeared for 2 days. However, her story only portrayed Pedro as impulsive and possessive without helping investigators find the truth. A few days after Pedro's funeral, Rosa returned to the police station and accused her ex-husband, Ruben, of the murder. She described him as controlling and jealous, implying he might have killed Pedro out of rage. When questioned, Ruben acknowledged that their marriage had been full of arguments, but said his jealousy had been justified. Rosa, he claimed, had been unfaithful several times, first with a co-worker named Albert and later with Pedro. He claimed that he was no longer interested in her relationships and had never confronted her partner. Ruben had an alibi because he was at work at the time of the murder, a claim confirmed by his colleagues and superiors. With Ruben cleared, investigators turned their attention back to Rosa and to the other man in her life, Albert Lopez. Rosa Peral was born on March 27, 1981, in Barcelona. Her father, Francisco Paco Peral, was well known among those close to her. Her mother had recently passed away due to complications from surgery. Rosa met Ruben when they were very young. Their first daughter was born in 2010, and 2 years later, they married and had a second child. However, Rosa's personal life was far from stable. According to Ruben, Rosa began an affair with her colleague, Albert Lopez, while they both worked for the Guardia Urbana. Their relationship started in 2012, when they were assigned to patrol together. By 2013, just a year after her second daughter was born, she and Albert were secretly dating. Even after separating from Ruben and beginning a relationship with Pedro, Rosa continued to see Albert in secret. He remained her lover through 2 consecutive relationships. During their marriage, Ruben often tried to ignore Rosa's infidelities, but certain situations made this impossible, like when she attended police events with Albert, behaving as if they were a couple while still married. Eventually, Ruben had enough and decided to separate from her. Despite their long affair, Rosa and Albert never made their relationship official. She wanted commitment, but he refused. Albert didn't want children or the responsibility of being a stepfather to Rosa's daughters. Around this time, Rosa began dating Pedro. Unlike Albert, Pedro wanted a serious relationship and cared deeply for her and her children. Still, Albert couldn't let go. Although he started dating other women, his obsession with Rosa continued. He eventually reached out to her again, and they began meeting in secret, setting the stage for a tragic series of events that would later shock Spain. Albert had no idea that Rosa was now living with and engaged to Pedro. Albert believed Rosa was single, just casually seeing him. When he discovered she was actually with Pedro, he was enraged. Feeling betrayed, he distanced himself and tried to move on, posting photos on social media of vacations, parties, and nights out with other women. Despite this, he soon reached out to Rosa again, and they resumed their affair in secret. In April 2017, Albert proposed to Rosa in an unexpected and unusual way. One afternoon, while Rosa was relaxing on the terrace with her friends, Albert suddenly showed up, tossed a small box to her, and told her to guess what was inside. The box contained a ring. His approach was more spontaneous than romantic, yet it reflected his complicated emotions. Even though Rosa told her friends that she was engaged to Pedro, she still did not refuse Albert's gift. She accepted the ring, took intimate photos, wearing it, and sent them to him. Later, her friends were stunned to see a photo where she wore 2 engagement rings, Pedro's on one hand and Albert's on the other. Rosa's friends, aware of her double life, often asked who she would ultimately choose. Her response was blunt. She preferred Pedro because he dressed better and was better in bed. Eventually, Pedro discovered romantic messages between Rosa and Albert, and their lives began to unravel. During the investigation that followed, police reviewed both Rosa's and Albert's professional records. Rosa's file showed no record of violence, but did include a troubling incident from her early career. When she was 23, her email was hacked, and her nude photos were sent to all her colleagues. More than a year later, she filed a complaint against a deputy inspector. However, the deputy inspector's lawyer argued that during that time, Rosa remained intimate with him and several other police officers, even though she was married. Albert, meanwhile, had a more serious record. In August 2014, he was allegedly involved in the death of a street vendor. That day, Rosa was patrolling with Albert and another officer when they stopped the vendor during a police check. The man became aggressive, stabbing Rosa and hitting her in the head before running off. Albert chased him, and moments later, the vendor fell down a steep slope. He was taken to a hospital, where he later died from his injuries. Albert claimed it was an accident, that the man had simply slipped, but investigators were not fully convinced. Because Albert was known for being shorter-tempered and aggressive, They suspected he might have pushed the man. However, with no solid evidence, the case was ruled an accident. Years later, during the investigation into Pedro's murder, Albert's violent past came up again. Detectives examined the phones of Rosa and Albert, checking their messages, calls, and GPS data from around the time of the crime. What they found was deeply troubling. On May 1, 2017, the location data from Pedro's, Rosa's, and Albert's phones placed all three at the same location, Rosa and Pedro's home. That same night, Rosa and Albert spoke by phone, and 4 hours later, Albert made a short call from a prepaid number before arriving at the house around 2:00 a.m. The next day, May 2, their phones again showed them in the same area, this time near the home of Rosa's ex-husband, Ruben. Investigators later found Pedro's burned car and body in that same area. The coincidence initially made Ruben a suspect, but his phone data proved he was nowhere near the scene. Confirming his alibi, a friend of Rosa's then revealed something even more disturbing. Just 2 days after Pedro's burned body was discovered, Rosa hosted a dinner at her home. The friend, her partner, and Albert all attended. Everyone acted as if nothing had happened, showing no sign of distress. Even worse, Rosa and Albert behaved affectionately, like a couple. Later, a colleague testified that Rosa had confided in him after the dinner, admitting she was afraid of Albert. Around the same time, one of Pedro's close friends, Javier, refused to represent Rosa when she sought his help. He was already assisting Pedro's family and could not represent someone who was a suspect in the same case. As pressure grew, Rosa returned to the police station and changed her story. This time, instead of blaming Ruben, she blamed Albert Lopez, her former lover, secret partner, and alleged accomplice. The change puzzled investigators. If Rosa truly believed Albert had killed Pedro, why would she dine with him instead of going directly to the police? The only detail that supported her claim was that she had once said she feared Albert, but investigators suspected she might have used that statement to strengthen her defense. Eventually, police arrested both Rosa and Albert and searched their homes. Albert's apartment appeared normal, but his car stood out. It was unnaturally spotless and reeked of air freshener, cleaners, and gasoline. At Rosa's house, luminol tests detected faint blood traces on walls, towels, and various items. Investigators also noticed freshly painted areas, missing furniture, and a redecorated room, suggesting an attempt to hide evidence. Inside a wardrobe, they discovered Pedro's police badge, ID card, and phone. It was normal for Pedro's belongings to be in the house where he lived with her. But what caught the police's attention was that there were messages sent from this phone after the day Pedro was supposed to have died. May 2. It was clear that someone was impersonating him. Forensic evidence indicates that Pedro was killed between 3 and 6:00 a.m. On May 2, that morning, the GPS data from the phones of Rosa, Albert, and Pedro all placed them at Rosa and Albert's home. Later the same day, their phones were detected again near Ruben's house, the same area where Pedro's burned car was eventually discovered. 2 days later, when police went to speak with Rosa for the first time, she refused to let them in, claiming her daughters were asleep. She also showed officers a WhatsApp conversation she said was with Pedro, messages that investigators later confirmed had been sent after he was already dead. When police eventually brought Rosa and Albert in for questioning, they used an interview method designed to reveal inconsistencies. Each time one of them made a statement, officers repeated it to the other to observe their reactions. As expected, the two began blaming each other, Rosa blaming Albert and Albert blaming Rosa. It became clear that one or both of them were lying. In 2018, new testimony surfaced. A neighbor who had been secretly romantically involved with Rosa told police that on the night of May 2nd, he messaged her about hearing a chainsaw coming from her house. He admitted he hadn't reported this earlier because he didn't want to expose their affair. He also revealed that Rosa often called him over when Pedro was angry and left home, implying their meetings happened when Pedro was away. Investigators searched for the chainsaw but never found it. By February 2020, 3 years after the crime, the long-awaited trial began. It became one of Spain's most closely followed cases, full of sensational details and shocking revelations. On the stand, Rosa claimed Albert was the one who killed Pedro. She said that early on May 2nd, Albert came to her house, grabbed an axe, and attacked Pedro while she ran upstairs to protect her daughters. She portrayed herself as a victim, saying Albert was violent and had even hit her before during police duties. According to her, Albert forced her to clean the crime scene afterward, threatening her if she refused. Albert told a very different story. He claimed that when he arrived, Pedro was already dead, and Rosa asked him to help dispose of the body. He said Rosa manipulated him, wanting to frame her ex-husband, Ruben. That, he said, was why they drove to Ruben's neighborhood to burn Pedro's car. In admitting this, Albert confessed to helping cover up the crime. One of the most disturbing testimonies came from Antonia, the stepmother of Rosa's daughters. Antonia testified in court that the girls saw Rosa covered in blood, leading Pedro down the stairs that night. They described Pedro as disoriented, walking like a robot, possibly drugged. Investigators believe Pedro was sedated with medication he took for sciatica, pills missing from the house. Later, one of Rosa's former inmates testified that Rosa had privately confessed to dissolving Pedro's medication in water after a heated argument so he would calm down. Once he was incapacitated, she and Albert killed him. That night, Rosa and Albert left separately, Rosa in her car, Albert driving Pedro's. They went to the Foix Reservoir, where they set fire to Pedro's car with his body inside. Investigators concluded that Rosa and Albert's motives were twofold. They wanted to remove Pedro so they could continue their affair freely, and they hoped to frame Rosa's ex-husband, Ruben, with whom she was fighting over custody of her daughters, but their plan failed. Prosecutors sought 25 years in prison for Rosa and 24 for Albert, arguing that they had drugged Pedro before killing him. The case showed clear evidence of premeditation and cruelty. In 2021, the court delivered its verdict. Both Rosa Peral and Albert Lopez were found guilty of Pedro Rodriguez's murder and ordered to pay nearly 885,000 euros compensation to Pedro's family. Rosa received a 25-year sentence for aggravated murder. Due to her intimate relationship with the victim, having been jailed since 2017, she had already served about 6 years at sentencing. Albert received a 20-year sentence and had been imprisoned for the same length of time. While in prison, Albert reportedly attended rehabilitation programs and showed remorse, acknowledging his role in the crime, a factor that might grant him limited privileges. Both Rosa and Albert appealed their convictions, but Spain's Supreme Court rejected their petitions. However, Albert's confession left a small chance for Rosa's case to be reviewed in the future. Even in prison, Rosa continued to draw public attention. Reports emerged about her alleged relationships with other inmates, both male and female. There were also renewed claims about Albert's possible involvement in the death of a street vendor known as El Bonato. A fellow inmate alleged that Rosa confessed Albert had killed the man, saying Albert told her afterward that he did it for her, that no one would ever harm her again. More recently, Rosa filed a $30 million lawsuit against Netflix over the series Burning Body, which portrayed her story. She argued that the show violated her daughter's privacy and damaged her reputation as a mother. However, since her ex-husband Ruben has legal custody of the children, only he has the right to pursue such a lawsuit. While in prison, Rosa gave interviews for the documentary The Tapes of Rosa Peral, where she continued to assert her innocence. She denied hiding assets from the court, explaining that she had only transferred money to her father to avoid seizure, not to conceal it. Today, Rosa's daughters, now teenagers aged 15 and 13, visit her regularly with their grandfather, who remains her most loyal supporter. He continues to believe firmly in her innocence. Rosa maintains that she was framed, insisting she loved Pedro and would never have harmed him. Still, the courts, investigators, and much of the Spanish public believe otherwise. Her father's steadfast belief in her innocence remains one of the few enduring expressions of loyalty in a story marked by deceit, betrayal, and irreversible tragedy. In the quiet streets of New Haven, Indiana, what began as an ordinary night between a married couple soon turned into a scene of horror. A blood-soaked staircase, a frantic call to 911, a husband barely clinging to life, his wife's calm voice telling dispatchers have fell, but nothing about that night felt like an accident. The bruises, broken bones, and her unsettling calmness all suggested something more sinister beneath the surface of their seemingly perfect marriage. Friends who once saw Kevin and Allison Davis as the ideal couple began to wonder, had love turned deadly inside their home on Douglas Lane? By morning, Kevin was dead. Allison was a widow and a suspect. What followed was a tangled story of conflicting accounts, haunting evidence, and one question that still divides their Indiana community: was it a tragic fall or a deliberate murder? Kevin Davis was born on July 1, 1983, to his mother, Alta Beers. From an early age, everyone liked him. His friends described him as kind, hard-working, and always willing to help others. At the age of 40, Kevin worked as a gardener and had a stable life in New Haven, Indiana. One day, he met Allison by chance. They fell in love, got married, and lived together in a house on Douglas Lane. They didn't have children, but adored their pit bull mix, Willow, whom they treated like family. To their friends, Kevin and Allison seemed like a happy couple with a full, active life. Jason Young, a friend of Kevin's, said he could sometimes be loud and opinionated, but it was all part of his personality. Allison worked in retail at Victoria's Secret, where she made everyone feel welcome and valued. She and Kevin often affectionately called each other babe. Everything about their life looked happy and stable. But beneath that surface, something dark was brewing. On the evening of Friday, August 11, 2023, Kevin arrived at East Haven Tavern around 9 p.m. Taking his usual seat at the bar while waiting for Allison to finish work. When she arrived, they greeted each other warmly. Their friend, Jason, was also there, and the three of them enjoyed drinks and laughed all night long. Kevin had a few beers and vodka shots, while Allison sipped her usual sweet cocktail. Bartenders said the night seemed completely ordinary. Around 1 o'clock Emission, on August 12, Allison left first, with Kevin following soon after. They both headed home to Douglas Lane, ready to call it a night, but within hours, everything changed. At 1:11 a.m., Kevin texted Jason after getting home. Jason asked if they made it back safely. Kevin apologized and said everything was fine. He was just listening to music. They kept chatting for over an hour, with Kevin sounding cheerful and joking around. Finally, at 2:31 a.m., Kevin sent one last text, saying he was going to put his phone on silent because he needed to go to sleep. Between 2:31 a.m. and 4:38 a.m., Something terrifying happened inside Kevin and Allison's home. At 4:38 a.m., Allison called 911. The call lasted about a minute. In a calm tone, she told the dispatcher that her husband had just fallen down the stairs, that there was blood everywhere, and that she couldn't flip him over. She added that she didn't know whether he was alive or dead. Detective James Kruger later said the call sounded rehearsed. Allison never asked dispatchers to hurry, and he believed her tone was more focused on herself than on Kevin. Officers Garrett Shanebrook and Corporal Cade Hetrick arrived within minutes. Allison met them outside and led them in. At the bottom of the staircase, they found Kevin lying face down in a large pool of blood. Blood covered the walls, railing, and floor, with spatter reaching high above the stairs. Kevin was barely breathing, with blood flowing from his nose and mouth. His body temperature was 91 degrees Fahrenheit, dangerously low compared to the normal 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. Corporal Cade Hetrick, who witnessed the scene, commented that this didn't look like a fall to him. There were no signs in the house that suggested a hard fall. No damaged railings, broken furniture, or dents in the walls. Kevin's body was lying flat, not twisted or wedged, as one might expect from a fall. The amount of blood made Hetrick ask Allison if there were any firearms in the house. Fearing Kevin might have shot himself, Allison confirmed there were firearms, but none were found near Kevin's body. Paramedics rushed Kevin to Parkview Regional Medical Center, but Allison's behavior immediately struck them as unusual. While talking to paramedics, she was laughing. She didn't seem worried about her husband's injuries. No tears. No attempt to ride in the ambulance. Detective Kruger was present at the scene and began the interrogation. Allison said that around 1:00 a.m., after returning from the bar, she and Kevin got into an argument. Kevin went upstairs to sleep, and she lay on the living room sofa. She said she woke up to a loud noise and found Kevin lying at the bottom of the stairs, thinking he was just drunk and had fallen. Allison agreed to let Kruger search the house and signed a permit. However, she warned him not to enter a room upstairs because of a guard dog named Willow. She said she did not want to go near that room. Kruger agreed not to enter the room where Willow was staying. When he opened the door slightly, Willow growled and bared her teeth. The dog wouldn't let him in. Other than that, the house appeared normal, and Kruger believed Allison's story that Kevin's fall had been a tragic accident caused by intoxication. The crime scene was cleared the same day. Allison's father, Steve Krauser, came over to clean up the blood, wanting to help his daughter in her grief. Meanwhile, Kevin's condition at the hospital worsened. His mother, Alta Beers, had received a text from Allison early that morning saying, "There's been an accident." Alta texted back for details, but got no response and went back to sleep. Assuming it wasn't serious, around 6:30 a.m., Alta finally spoke to Allison by phone and was surprised by how calm she sounded. Allison's tone made Alta believe that everything was fine, but it wasn't. Kevin's friends, Jason and Todd Spessert, hurried to the hospital. They spoke with Allison and her parents. Jason thought Allison had been crying, but was trying to hold herself together. Todd said she looked distraught. Inside Kevin's room, Allison stood by his bedside, calling to him as her father watched helplessly. Kevin suffered his third cardiac arrest that evening. At 10:07 p.m. on August 12, 2023, doctors removed him from life support. 40-year-old Kevin Davis was gone. Allison, 33, was now a widow. Friends were heartbroken. Everyone believed it had to be an accident, a terrible fall. But 3 days later, everything changed. On August 15, 2023, Dr. Scott Wagner performed Kevin's autopsy and discovered devastating injuries. The right side of Kevin's skull was crushed, with several fractures. The injuries were confined to his head. No other trauma was found. Dr. Wagner determined the damage was consistent with a fall from at least 20 feet or a high-speed car crash. The injuries would have rendered Kevin unconscious within seconds and brain-dead upon impact. He concluded that Kevin's wounds could not have been caused by a fall down a normal staircase. The evidence suggested Kevin had been struck in the head with a blunt object. The Allen County Coroner's Office ruled Kevin's death a homicide on October 17, 2023, caused by blunt force trauma to the head. Detective Kruger sat in his office, processing the information. If Kevin was murdered, it meant someone else did it, and the only person with him that night was Allison. Kruger reviewed the text messages between Kevin and Allison. When he read Kevin's last text message to his wife, he felt that there was something unusual about the content, not at all gentle. Kruger sensed tension between them. Then he discovered something even more troubling. Allison had given conflicting accounts of what happened that night. To police, Allison claimed she and Kevin had been drinking and argued after returning home. She said she slept on the couch while Kevin went upstairs. To Kevin's mother, Alta, Allison claimed Kevin had not been drinking and that they had been in bed upstairs when Kevin got up for water and accidentally fell down the stairs. To Kevin's brother, Allison said that she was in bed with her dog, Willow, and heard Kevin moving around but didn't pay attention because Willow was still lying there. She only went to check on Kevin later and found him fallen. And to the medics, Allison said she hadn't heard anything and hadn't seen Kevin for some time before finding his body. The stories contradicted one another, and Kruger believed Allison had been caught lying. Doctors also found something alarming. Kevin's body temperature was so low upon arrival at the hospital that he was hypothermic, and his brain had almost no oxygen. One doctor said she had seen drowning victims with higher oxygen levels than Kevin. This suggested Kevin may have been brain dead for hours before Allison called 911. 4 weeks after Kevin's death, Kruger met with his mother, Alta. She told him that Kevin and Allison were having marital problems and were possibly about to separate. This reinforced Kruger's suspicions. He believed that Allison had lost control and beaten her husband to death, possibly with a blunt object such as a kettlebell, dumbbell, or baseball bat, and then staged the crime by dragging his body down the stairs. However, no weapon was ever recovered. Kruger theorized that it might have been hidden in the upstairs bedroom with Willow, a room he hadn't searched. The thought haunted him. Kruger admitted that he completely regretted not having searched that room on the morning of the 12th, and that the murder weapon could have been there on December 22, 2023. A warrant was issued for Allison's arrest. 3 days before Christmas, she arrived at the Allen County Jail with her parents and told the officers that she was Allison Davis and that she was there to turn herself in. She was handcuffed in front of them. Allison was charged with murder and held without bond. For the next 17 months, she remained in jail, able to see her family only during attorney visits through plexiglass. There were no video calls or regular visits, only waiting. From her cell, Allison told loved ones she couldn't sleep because she kept reliving that morning. She said she missed Kevin deeply and longed to hear him call her babe again. The prosecution believed their case was solid, but the defense saw things differently. On May 6, 2025, Allison Davis went on trial for murder. Chief Deputy Prosecutor Tissa Helge presented Dr. Bill Smoke as her key witness. Dr. Smoke, known for testifying in high-profile cases, including those of Derek Chauvin and Robert Feldman, was described as a police surgeon showing the jury CT scans of Kevin's skull. Dr. Smoke testified that Kevin had suffered multiple blows to various areas of his head. He concluded that Kevin had been beaten to death, not fallen down the stairs, and that a blunt object, possibly a kettlebell, weight, or baseball bat had likely been used. The prosecution focused on Allison's calm tone during the 911 call, her inconsistent statements, and her behavior with paramedics. They argued that Kevin's body placement at the base of the stairs did not match a natural fall. Crime scene technician Timothy Garrett testified that the blood found in the hallway and living room could not have come from a stair fall, stating that blood cannot turn a corner. Dr. Smock testified that Kevin's low body temperature showed he had been lying there for at least 2 hours before the 911 call. The prosecution claimed Allison had delayed the call to create her story and hide the weapon. The defense, led by attorneys Andrew Baldwin and Max Wiley, countered that there was no murder weapon, physical evidence, or motive. They argued Kevin had been legally intoxicated and fell down the steep stairs, hitting his head on the banister post. For support, they brought in Dr. Visa Dragovich, a forensic neuropathologist specializing in brain injuries. Dr. Dragovich testified that Kevin suffered only one head impact when he hit the banister post. That single, powerful blow shattered his skull in multiple places, causing his brain to bounce inside his head as bone fragments acted like shrapnel. He also disputed the prosecution's interpretation of Kevin's low body temperature. According to Dr. Dragovich, the impact destroyed Kevin's hypothalamus, the part of the brain that regulates temperature, causing his body to cool abnormally. The low temperature, he said, was evidence of severe brain damage, not a delayed emergency call. He explained that the absence of blood on the banister was due to Kevin's internal injuries. The bleeding occurred inside his head and exited only through his nose and mouth. Baldwin criticized the police investigation, pointing out that the crime scene was released the same day. Photos were taken 4 days later, and Allison's father was allowed to clean up blood. Friends described Kevin and Allison's marriage as happy. Jason said Kevin's joking text about his wife was just that, a joke. Wiley argued that Allison was not the kind of woman who would violently attack her husband. The jury never saw data from Allison's Garmin smartwatch, which the defense claimed supported her version of events. Judge Fran Gull ruled the data inadmissible after 6.5 hours of deliberation on May 9, 2025, around 11:00 p.m. The jury returned a verdict, not guilty. Allison Davis was acquitted of murder. Her father, Steve, watched as she broke down in tears of relief, though she remained in jail briefly for release processing at 2:12 a.m. On May 10, Allison walked out of jail to Cheers after spending 17 months behind bars. Her first meal as a free woman was wings and pizza. An anonymous juror said the reason they acquitted was because the prosecution had no convincing evidence, no weapon, no hard evidence, no way to determine how the crime happened. Dr. Dragovich's testimony helped them better understand Kevin's trauma. Without solid evidence, they couldn't convict Detective Kruger. Now the police chief was devastated. He said that he was 100% convinced Allison had murdered Kevin, adding that his biggest regret was not having searched the bedroom shared with Willow, where he believed the weapon might have been hidden. Kevin's mother, Alta Beers, showed grace, despite her grief. Alta took comfort knowing Kevin's organ donations saved 4 lives. Allison returned to her parents' home with Willow, choosing a quiet life as she tried to rebuild after losing her husband and spending 17 months in jail for a crime. The jury said she didn't commit. Kevin's death remains officially classified as a homicide. The case is still unsolved, and no one has been held accountable. On a quiet summer night in Darlington, laughter drifted from a modest brick house on Geneva Road, the sound of a family at happy, unaware that within hours their lives would be torn apart forever. By dawn, That same house was surrounded by police cars, its windows glowing under the flash of blue lights. Inside, a 14-year-old girl lay dead. What had begun as an ordinary evening, dinner, a football match, and a few harmless jokes, ended in tragedy that stunned an entire town. On a quiet summer night in Darlington, laughter drifted from a modest brick house on Geneva Road, the sound of a family at happy, unaware that within hours, their lives would be torn apart forever. By dawn, that same house was surrounded by police cars, its windows glowing under the flash of blue lights. Inside, a 14-year-old girl lay dead. Neighbors watched from their windows in muted disbelief. Just the previous night, the house had echoed with laughter. Now, only the commands of investigators and the sharp clicks of a camera disturbed the air, documenting every corner of the kitchen, the table, the dishes, the scattered fragments of a meal left unfinished. No one yet understood exactly what had happened. Only one devastating truth was certain. A 14-year-old girl was dead inside that house. On the front steps sat Sarah Hall, her shoulders trembling, her eyes wide but dry. A paramedic wrapped a blanket around her as she stared ahead, motionless. A few meters away stood Simon Vickers, hands cuffed, head bowed. Officers guided him toward a waiting police car. No one spoke. The atmosphere inside the Vickers house on the evening of July 5, 2024, had seemed perfectly ordinary. Simon returned from work around 7 p.m., switching on the TV to watch the Euro 2024 match. A half-empty bottle of red wine sat beside him, along with a hand-rolled cigarette laced with cannabis. He looked at ease, bedulled, detached. In the kitchen, Sarah Hall was making dinner. She moved with practiced rhythm, managing each step of the meal with quiet familiarity. Their daughter, Scarlett Vickers, 14, was upstairs scrolling through TikTok and chatting with friends. After a while, bored of the screen's glow, she wandered downstairs. It was around 10:15 p.m. The scent of tomatoes and herbs filled the kitchen. Scarlett leaned on the counter, teasing her mother, dipping a spoon into the sauce, laughing. Sarah joined in, tossing grapes toward her daughter. A light-hearted, harmless game, but the noise grated on Simon's nerves. The laughter made it hard for him to focus on the match commentary. Irritated and slightly drunk, he asked them to quiet down. His request went mostly ignored. A few minutes later, still yoking, Sarah approached him with a pair of kitchen tongs, playfully pinched his arm, expecting him to laugh. Instead, Simon flinched, shouted that it hurt. Scarlett, amused, smirked and told him not to be so dramatic. The comment stung. His anger flared. Without thinking, he turned toward the counter, reaching for what he thought were the tongs. Instead, his hand closed around a kitchen knife with a long, narrow blade. The blade struck Scarlett in the chest, just below her left shoulder. The wound was deep. The knife pierced her lung and grazed her heart. Scarlett collapsed before anyone could move. Panic-stricken, Sarah rushed to her daughter, pressing a towel against the wound as she screamed for help. Simon stood frozen, his mind unable to process the unfolding horror. Within seconds, Sarah dialed emergency services. Paramedics arrived within minutes, working frantically to revive Scarlett, but the wound was catastrophic, beyond repair. At 11:07 p.m., the attending doctor pronounced Scarlett Vickers dead. The kitchen, filled with laughter only minutes earlier, had become the site of unimaginable loss. After Scarlett's body was removed, only her parents and officers from Durham Constabulary remained. Yellow tape sealed off the kitchen. The lead investigator noted no signs of a struggle. Dishes were still neatly arranged, chairs untouched, furniture undisturbed. Everything looked ordinary, except for the blood spreading across the tiles. Sarah sat motionless on the living room couch, her gaze unfocused. Her answers came in short, hollow phrases, as though she was speaking through a fog. Her blood pressure was dangerously low, and her speech disjointed. Paramedics decided to leave her under supervision of a police medic. Simon was escorted into the next room. His shirt was soaked with blood, his pupils wide and glassy. He insisted it was an accident, that he had been holding the kitchen tongs, not a knife. But when officers tested his breath, they detected a strong odor of alcohol and the distinct scent of cannabis. The initial assessment concluded with the recovery of the weapon, a kitchen knife with a metal handle found near the refrigerator. A crime scene photographer documented the knife's position relative to the victim's body for later comparison with autopsy findings. The blade was sealed in a transparent evidence bag. On the kitchen table lay an open bottle of red wine and an ashtray filled with the remains of a hand-rolled cigarette, both logged as potential indicators of intoxication. Shortly after 1:00 a.m., the homicide detective arrived. He began questioning Simon in the presence of a duty solicitor. Simon's responses were disjointed and inconsistent. He reversed the order of events, alternated between claiming the knife slipped and that his daughter had moved too close. Each contradiction was carefully noted in the report. Sarah's statement was taken separately. Her version partially aligned with Simon's. She said he had swung his arm without looking and that it all happened in a blink. After both interviews, the house was sealed off as a full crime scene. What had begun as a family dinner had turned into a homicide investigation. By the morning of July 6, 2024, Simon Vickers faced a formal interview at the police station. Simon's timeline shifted with each retelling. First, he was sitting at the table, then standing near the TV. His daughter was by the door, then by the stove, then passing behind him. When shown photographs of the knife, he stared at them for several seconds before whispering, "I thought it was the tongs." Within the first 20 minutes of the interview, clear discrepancies began to surface between Simon Vickers' account and the forensic evidence. A medical expert, consulted by phone, confirmed that the angle and depth of the wound made an accidental stabbing highly unlikely. This professional assessment, appended to the preliminary report, severely undermined Simon's claim that the incident was an accident. After a short recess, Simon repeated that he had no intention of causing harm, describing the event as a game that went wrong. He attributed his patchy memory to intoxication, admitting he had drunk nearly a full bottle of wine and used banned substances to unwind. Simon insisted that he loved his daughter and that they never argued. When asked to describe the exact moment of the injury, he said quietly that he had swung his arm without looking, and then she had fallen. He added that it had been over in a second. The statement was officially logged as an admission of action. By 4:00 a.m., the lead investigator informed Simon that his status was being changed from witness to suspect in the death of Scarlett. He was read his rights and informed that the case would be transferred to the Major Crimes Unit around 9:00 a.m. The next morning, investigators received the toxicology report. It showed a blood alcohol concentration of 0.14% and traces of THC, the active compound in cannabis. Based on these findings, the charges were revised to reflect an act committed under the influence, resulting in the death of a minor. Simon Vickers and Sarah Hall had lived modestly in Darlington, in a small brick house on Geneva Road. Simon worked at a local factory. Sarah took shifts at a nearby convenience store. The two had married young and endured several miscarriages before finally welcoming their daughter in 2010. Their life was quiet, unremarkable. Neighbors described them as friendly, soft-spoken people who kept to themselves. Simon worked hard. Sarah managed the home. Scarlett was the center of their world. Scarlett Vickers was outgoing, curious, and full of life. Teachers remembered her sense of humor, creativity, especially the TikTok videos she liked to make with her friends. At home, she helped her mother with chores and occasionally clashed with her father in the way most teenagers do. But she was always the first to apologize. There were no records of domestic violence. Friends said the family seemed happy and ordinary. No one could have imagined tragedy behind those walls. That is why the night of July 5, 2024, sent shockwaves through Darlington. Few could believe that in a home known for calm and affection, a single moment had destroyed everything. A few days after Simon Vickers' arrest, investigators began to examine his past. What they found startled even close relatives. In 1993, Simon had been convicted of assault with a knife after a bar fight in Darlington. Then 19 years old, he slashed another man's arm during the altercation. The injury was not life-threatening, but the court found him guilty of assault with a weapon. Simon pleaded guilty and served 2 years in prison. After his release, Simon kept a clean record, held a stable job, and, according to colleagues, was regarded as a model employee. This newly unearthed chapter of his past had a profound effect on how investigators evaluated his actions. What had initially appeared to be a single, tragic accident was now being reassessed through the lens of a prior incident involving a knife. Prosecutors ordered a psychological evaluation to determine whether Simon exhibited a pattern of impulsive or violent behavior. The psychologist who had treated him during his imprisonment described Simon as generally self-controlled and stable, yet prone to sudden bursts of anger when under pressure or the influence of alcohol. Experts noted recurring behavioral traits: impulsive action, lack of premeditation, and immediate remorse. This revelation sparked debate among the investigative team. Some argued that a decades-old offense should not taint the current case, while others believed it revealed a consistent pattern of violent reactions fueled by alcohol. Ultimately, investigators decided to include Simon's prior conviction in the official case file. The psychological profile, assembled through interviews and expert analysis, portrayed Simon as someone who internalized his emotions, appearing calm outwardly while concealing silent frustration. He seldom voiced complaints, avoided confrontation, and allowed irritation to build over time. When intoxicated, however, he became prone to losing control, responding disproportionately to even minor provocations. Investigators reached a preliminary conclusion: the tragedy of July 5th was unlikely to have been a random accident. Instead, it appeared to stem from a combination of factors: alcohol consumption, the influence of banned substances, and long-suppressed anger resurfacing under stress. What had once seemed like a heartbreaking accident was now evolving into a criminal case built around a repeated pattern of violent behavior. Following Simon Vickers' arrest, the investigation entered the forensic phase. The primary objective was to determine precisely how and with what force the fatal wound had been inflicted. The knife recovered from the scene was sent to the Durham Forensic Crime Laboratory for examination. Experts determined that the blade measured 6 inches in length and 0.87 inches in width. Simon Vickers' fingerprints were clearly visible on the handle, and the blood on the blade matched Scarlett's DNA. No additional fingerprints or biological traces were found. Further analysis revealed no impact damage or abrasions on the blade, ruling out any chance of deflection or accidental ricochet. Forensic specialists focused on the wound's angle and depth. According to their report, the knife entered the chest at an angle of roughly 40 degrees and penetrated approximately 3 inches deep, striking both the left lung and the heart, causing massive internal bleeding. Experts stressed that this trajectory was virtually impossible to produce through an accidental throw. The motion, they concluded, was deliberate and delivered from close range. A 3D reconstruction of the kitchen was created to analyze the scene, considering the layout of the furniture, the stab trajectory, and the individual's relative heights. Investigators determined that Simon had been no more than 5 feet away from his daughter. This finding ruled out the possibility that the knife had simply slipped from his hand or been released unintentionally. Toxicology results confirmed the presence of alcohol and cannabinoids in Simon's blood, but not at levels high enough to indicate total loss of motor control. Experts concluded that while his judgment may have been impaired, his coordination remained intact, suggesting the arm movement was conscious, albeit impulsive. The autopsy on Scarlett Vickers corroborated the forensic findings. The fatal wound had been inflicted from the front, at a downward angle, combining both stabbing and slashing motion. The injury to the heart caused immediate circulatory collapse. There were no defensive wounds on her arms, face, or body, indicating the attack was sudden and occurred in a moment when she likely felt safe. After the evidence was thoroughly analyzed, investigators reached a unanimous conclusion. The death of 14-year-old Scarlett Vickers resulted from an intentional act committed by her father. Sarah remained the sole witness and primary source of information. The first rounds of questioning were conducted in the hospital under the supervision of a psychologist. Sarah was in deep shock. She spoke in fragments and repeatedly insisted that the tragedy had been a terrible mistake. Even after learning of her daughter's death and her husband's arrest, she continued to defend Simon, maintaining that he loved their child, had never been violent, and had never even raised his voice. To her, what happened was nothing more than a fatal misunderstanding, a confused moment when Simon grabbed the wrong object. Investigators noted that Sarah refused to entertain the possibility of intent and declined to read the official reports. Psychologists interpreted this as a form of denial, a psychological defense mechanism to preserve the illusion of normalcy. Over time, however, Sarah began to confront the irreversible reality. To her, what happened was nothing more than a fatal misunderstanding, a confused moment when Simon grabbed the wrong object. In pubs, at bus stops, and in corner shops, people weren't just mourning the girl's death. They were dissecting Simon's past, speculating about hidden tensions behind the family's quiet facade. Opinions varied, but few still believed it was merely an accident. Darlington is a small town where news travels faster than official statements. The morning after the tragedy, local headlines screamed, "Man arrested after daughter's death on Geneva Road." The name Vickers wasn't publicly released for several days, but by then, the family's life had already become public property. The trial of Simon Vickers began in January 2025 at Teesside Crown Court. The initially considered manslaughter upgraded to murder before trial, intentional homicide without premeditation. The proceedings attracted national attention. In his opening statement, the prosecutor meticulously outlined the events of July 5, 2024, emphasizing that Scarlett's death could not have been accidental. His argument was supported by forensic evidence, toxicology results showing alcohol and banned substances in Simon's system, and his prior criminal record. The defense presented a sharply different narrative. Simon's attorney described the case as a tragic mistake, a moment of intoxicated confusion with no intent to harm. He argued that Simon had always been a devoted father, with no history of conflict or aggression toward his daughter. The defense urged the jury to consider his cooperation, his visible remorse, and the complete absence of premeditation or malice. Expert witnesses were called to testify. The chief medical examiner stated that the nature of Scarlett's wounds eliminated any possibility of an accidental injury. His statement became a central pillar of the prosecution's case. Sarah Hall's testimony added palpable tension to the courtroom. She recounted the evening leading up to the tragedy, describing the atmosphere at home and explaining her own actions. When the prosecution asked directly whether her husband had intended to harm their daughter, she replied that she did not believe so, but couldn't explain how the knife ended up pointed at Scarlett. Her words, seemingly at odds with the experts' conclusions, sparked intense debate between the two sides. The judge had to pause her testimony several times due to her visible, emotional distress. The defense presented a sharply different narrative. Simon's attorney described the case as a tragic mistake, a moment of intoxicated confusion with no intent to harm. He argued that Simon had always been a devoted father, with no history of conflict or aggression toward his daughter. The defense urged the jury to consider his cooperation, his visible remorse, and the complete absence of premeditation or malice. Expert witnesses were called to testify. The chief medical examiner stated that the nature of Scarlett's wounds eliminated any possibility of an accidental injury. His statement became a central pillar of the prosecution's case. Sarah Hall's testimony added palpable tension to the courtroom. She recounted the evening leading up to the tragedy, describing the atmosphere at home and explaining her own actions. When the prosecution asked directly whether her husband had intended to harm their daughter, she replied that she did not believe so, but couldn't explain how the knife ended up pointed at Scarlett. Her words, seemingly at odds with the experts' conclusions, sparked intense debate between the two sides. The defense presented a sharply different narrative. Simon's attorney described the case as a tragic mistake, a moment of intoxicated confusion with no intent to harm. He argued that Simon had always been a devoted father, with no history of conflict or aggression toward his daughter. The defense urged the jury to consider his cooperation, his visible remorse, and the complete absence of premeditation or malice. Sarah Hall's testimony added palpable tension to the courtroom. She recounted the evening leading up to the tragedy, describing the atmosphere at home and explaining her own actions. When the prosecution asked directly whether her husband had intended to harm their daughter, she replied that she did not believe so, but couldn't explain how the knife ended up pointed at Scarlett. Her words, seemingly at odds with the experts' conclusions, sparked intense debate between the two sides. The defense presented a sharply different narrative. Simon's attorney described the case as a tragic mistake, a moment of intoxicated confusion with no intent to harm. He argued that Simon had always been a devoted father, with no history of conflict or aggression toward his daughter. The defense urged the jury to consider his cooperation, his visible remorse, and the complete absence of premeditation or malice. Westerville, Ohio, a peaceful city where the streets are tree-lined. In that small community, Emily Noble is known as a small but strong woman, a soul who loves nature, loves silence, and has always overcome all the losses in her life. Those around her see in Emily a rare resilience, a person who has lost friends, lost parent, lost a husband, but never lost faith in life. But in May 2020, Emily's life took a turn no one could have imagined. She disappeared the morning after her 52nd birthday. Her car, phone, and wallet were all still at home. 4 months later, her body was discovered hanging from a tree. Emily Noble, age 52, lived in Westerville, a peaceful suburb near Columbus, Ohio. She had worked for the state of Ohio's Medicaid office for over 10 years. As the main income provider, she had around $96,000 in personal savings. However, Emily's identity was not defined by her financial status. Emily was only 5 feet tall and weighed under 100 pounds. She had osteopenia, a condition that made her bones more fragile than average. Friends described her as lively, free-spirited, brave, and always smiling. She shared a special bond with her sister, Emily loved nature and often foraged for edible plants in the woods near her home. Every morning, she posted sunrise photos on Facebook. She was known for taking long, peaceful walks through her neighborhood. She treasured quiet moments and the space to think, but Emily's life had been marked by loss. In the 1,990 seconds, she witnessed several close friends die from AIDS. Her father suffered a catastrophic accident. He slipped, fell, hit his head, and never recovered. Less than a year later, her mother died in a car crash. She inherited her mother's condo on Abbey Cross Lane in Westerville, an 800-square-foot home that became her refuge. In 1983, Emily broke her nose in a fall, an injury that would become forensically relevant decades later, and in 2011, her first husband died by end his life. Emily had a history of depression. She sought therapy throughout her life, but her friends all said the same thing. She always pushed through. She always found her way back. After her first husband's death, Emily joined a dating site called Plenty of Fish, where she met Matthew Moore. At the time, he was living in Las Vegas and working in the casino industry. They married in 2018, and Moore moved to Ohio with his teenage son, Joey. From a previous marriage, Moore's past was complicated. His ex-wife, Lisa Peterson, later testified about an incident on New Year's Day, 2001, just 3 months into their marriage. She said Moore choked her while she was pregnant. They argued, and he suddenly put his hands around her neck. She said it was the only time he ever physically harmed her. They divorced in 2006. They had 2 children together. One of them died young. Though the cause was never publicly disclosed, Moore's mother died in 2018, and he placed his inheritance into a joint account with Emily. Their combined balance exceeded $400,000. Then, in the summer of 2019, tragedy struck yet again. Moore's 17-year-old son, Joey, died by end his life by hanging in a park not far from their home. It devastated Moore. Moore's therapy notes expressed deep concern for his mental health after Joey's death, but there were no allegations of violence. By May 2020, the global health issues had changed their lives. Moore was unemployed. Emily continued working, still carrying the financial weight of the household. There were tensions in the marriage. Text messages revealed arguments about Moore's drinking, his mood, and name-calling. One message stood out. Emily said she was afraid to go home. Yet Moore also sent messages encouraging her, urging her to stay hopeful. When he asked whether she wanted a divorce, she never said she did. Friends noticed troubling signs. Suzanne Kavanaugh saw bruises on Emily's arm. The last time they met, she raised concerns about the relationship, which ultimately strained their friendship. Emily had also stopped wearing her wedding ring before she disappeared. Yet, despite all these signs, Emily seemed to be improving. She was transitioning back to full-time work. She was, as always, finding her way through. May 24, 2020, was Emily's 52nd birthday. That morning, she and Moore drove to Buckeye Lake to collect water from a natural spring. They returned to Westerville, stopped by the Field of Heroes Memorial, and had a small picnic in the park. The global health issues restrictions had just eased, and bars were reopening. To celebrate, they decided to go bar hopping in downtown Westerville. Their first stop was the Cobalt Grill restaurant, where they took selfies together. Bartender Jessica served them around 7:00 p.m. They were her only customers. They stayed for roughly 45 minutes and told her they were continuing their birthday outing. They left around 7:30 p.m. Their neighbor, John, later said he saw Emily at home sometime around 8:00 p.m. According to Moore's account, they returned home, went to bed, and he slept in the guest room so he wouldn't disturb her. User activity on Emily's phone stopped after 6:00 p.m. On May 24, Moore, meanwhile, had a 30-minute phone call with a friend just after 7:30 p.m. His phone showed uninterrupted user activity until 6:00 a.m. The next morning, May 25, 2020, Moore claimed he slept until about 10:00 a.m. When he woke up, Emily was gone. Left behind were her car in the driveway, her keys, her phone, her wallet, her credit cards, everything. At 2:47 p.m., Moore used Emily's phone to call her friend, asking if she had seen her. Shortly afterward, he filed a missing person report with the Westerville Police Department. Officer Robert Hollis responded, and his body camera footage captured the entire interaction. Both cars were there. Nothing immediately suggested foul play, but Detective Steve Grubbs later admitted that his instincts were triggered. Something about Moore's version of events felt wrong. Within hours, hundreds of volunteers gathered at Westerville North High School to help search. Multiple agencies joined in. The FBI, state police, Caminos Nina units, dive teams, bloodhounds, and cadaver dogs searched the condo area, the neighborhood, and the western woodline. Dogs tracked along the road near the condo and the bike path, but there was a crucial mistake. The area where Emily's body would eventually be found was never searched. Police Chief Charles Chandler later told the media that the area had been searched 3 times. This was not true. Moore's behavior during the search struck many as unusual. He claimed he had shown flyers at 2 Black Lives Matter rallies, yet Emily's family said he refused to join any organized search efforts. Eventually, he stopped cooperating with police altogether. Then, in September 2020, Moore contacted producers of the Vanished podcast, pleading for Emily's case to be featured. The episode aired that month. Both producers and listeners found Moore's interview extremely odd. When asked to describe Emily, Moore said he never saw her weigh herself, that she was tiny, like 100. He described her legs, her arms, her posture, and said she was, anatomically, a really pretty lady. He made strange comments about her facial expressions. Podcast researcher Amanda Coleman later said Moore said things to her that she had never heard in any interview before. The interview raised red flags. On Wednesday, September 16, 2020, 3 local women were foraging in a wooded area west of Emily and Moore's condo, just off County Line Road. Less than half a mile from the home, it was a place Emily frequently visited to forage for edible plants. That's when they saw it. Skeletal remains, suspended from the branch of a honeysuckle tree. A 20-inch black plastic USB cord was wrapped around the neck and tied to the branch above. When the remains arrived at the Montgomery County Coroner's Office at 2:08 a.m. on September 17, they weighed only 18 pounds. X-rays and photographs were taken. The remains were described as skeletonized with only minimal mummified tissue. On September 22, dental records confirmed the body was Emily Noble. Police Chief Chandler called the case highly unusual. A black water bottle lay beside Emily's left leg, filled with a peach-colored liquid containing 6% alcohol. Her engagement ring and wedding band were also placed next to her left leg. She had removed them. Her right hand was gripping her right ankle. Her left arm rested downward. With her hand touching the water bottle, she was dressed in black Old Navy leggings, a black spaghetti-strap tank top, a white Old Navy long-sleeved shirt that had slipped down around her waist, and trainers. An e-cigarette was tucked into the pocket of her leggings. The USB cord and other items recovered at the scene tested negative for DNA. On October 2, 2020, the remains were transported to Ohio State University. Dr. Amanda Agnew and a graduate student in the OSU Skeletal Biology Research Lab conducted additional analysis. Their report, completed on January 11, 2021, identified 4 fractures in the hyoid bone, fractures in the nasal cavity, and several missing toe bones. A portion of the hyoid bone was also absent. The injuries were determined to be perimortem, occurring at or near the time of death, or post-mortem. 10 days later, the Montgomery County coroner ruled the cause of death as multiple injuries to the face and neck, but the case didn't take its decisive turn until May 27, 2021. Dr. Bill Smock issued his findings. Dr. Smock, a forensic physician and strangulation expert, produced the report that became the centerpiece of the prosecution's theory. He concluded that Emily had been manually strangled. The 4 fractures in her throat, he said, combined with facial fractures caused by blunt force trauma, indicated her death had been staged to resemble a hanging. In his opinion, the evidence was consistent with homicide. However, Dr. Smock was not a board-certified forensic pathologist. He was an emergency medicine doctor who had completed a 1-year clinical forensic medicine fellowship in 1994. More critically, Dr. Smock never examined Emily Noble's remains in person. He never visited the scene. His conclusions were based solely on reports and photographs. On September 16, 2021, exactly 1 year after the remains were found, a death certificate was issued. The manner of death: homicide by manual strangulation. Delaware County Coroner Dr. Mark Sleeper, a family practice physician rather than a licensed forensic pathologist, later explained the delay. OSU specialists had initially refused to endorse the homicide ruling. Sleeper eventually learned that, as the elected coroner, he could sign the certificate himself. Meanwhile, in March 2021, investigators returned to the area where the body had been found. They discovered bones that had been missed during the initial recovery, including Emily's arms. Bones investigators originally believed had been taken for DNA testing but were, in fact, still lying in the soil. The discovery exposed serious flaws in the initial scene processing. The case against Matthew Moore remained largely circumstantial, but prosecutors believed it was powerful. Phone records created a troubling timeline. Emily's phone stopped showing user activity at 6:00 p.m. On May 24, Moore's phone, however, showed continuous activity until 6:00 a.m. The next morning, analysis of Moore's phone revealed something critical. While he claimed he had been at a bus depot that morning, part of his job checking advertisements on buses, the data told a different story. At 9:25 am, Moore's phone pinged off a tower at Murphy's Quarry. Less than a mile from the home, the quarry was visible from the property. CCTV footage captured what appeared to be Moore's blue Fiat driving past the quarry at 9:59 a.m. Heading away from the house, only after this did his phone appear in Broadstone, where he claimed to have been the entire morning. CCTV cameras filmed Emily passing the quarry 3 minutes later. She was seen returning home at 9:41 a.m. Investigators believed she was killed shortly after she arrived back at the condo. Police also learned that Moore had moved items in the garage while officers were present during the missing person investigation. He shifted an orange extension cord and a cooler, leaving a flashlight next to both objects. Prosecutors argued that he used the flashlight to illuminate the woods while staging Emily's body at night. Moore's behavior during his police interview raised additional concerns. He repeatedly referred to Emily in the past tense. He mentioned end her life multiple times, long before her body had been found. On June 17, 2021, more than a year after Emily vanished, a Delaware County grand jury returned an indictment. Matthew Moore was arrested the same day during a traffic stop by heavily armed Westerville police officers. Reporters surrounded him as he stood in handcuffs. He was charged with 2 counts of murder, felony murder, and purposeful murder, and 1 count of felonious assault. He pleaded not guilty to all charges. Bond was set at $2.5 million. Moore remained in the Delaware County Jail until the trial concluded. The trial began on August 16, 2022. Prosecutors Mark Sleeper and Melissa Schiff faced off against defense attorney Diane Menashe. The jury visited the couple's home and the wooded area where Emily's body had been discovered. Opening statements were delivered on August 17. The prosecution framed its case around Emily's resilience. Lead prosecutor Sleeper recounted the tragedies Emily had endured, the friends she lost to AIDS, the deaths of her parents, her first husband's end his life. The prosecution's star witness was Dr. Bill Smock. He testified without hesitation. Emily Noble's hyoid fracture did not come from her hanging, it came from strangulation. She was strangled manually and then placed in the tree. During Dr. Amanda Agnew's presentation on the skeletal analysis, she was questioned about her findings. She admitted that the right nasal cavity was not fractured and that a graduate student contributed to the report. The defense attacked the integrity of the investigation itself. Crime scene evidence had been mishandled. Teeth and bones had been left behind, only to be recovered months later. The wooded area where Emily's body was ultimately found had never been searched. No DNA, no blood, no direct link tying Moore to the crime. During closing arguments, the prosecution revealed their full theory for the first time. They believed Moore had followed Emily during a walk on the evening of May 24, attacked her in the wooded area after his 30-minute phone call around 7:30 p.m., and then staged the scene during the 3-hour. Moore grew visibly emotional in the courtroom, throwing up his arms in frustration. When Menashe referenced Moore's son's end his life, Moore wiped away tears. At least one juror was seen crying. On August 26, 2022, after just under 3 hours of deliberation, the jury returned its verdict. Not guilty on all 3 counts. Moore collapsed forward, burying his face in his hands as he sobbed. He cradled his head and repeatedly mouthed, "Thank you," toward the jury box. In March 2023, Moore published a book titled Emily, a staged suicide in Ohio. In it, he maintains that Emily died by ended her own life. He described the writing process as therapeutic and said he hoped Emily's family would one day read it. Despite her family's unwavering belief that Emily Noble was murdered, and despite her death certificate listing homicide by manual strangulation, no one has ever been convicted. The truth of what happened in those woods remains unresolved, suspended between 2 stark possibilities. What is certain is that Emily, a 52-year-old woman who spent her life overcoming tragedy, is gone.